This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the town of North Haven.
Good evening. I'd like to call the Tuesday, November 27, 2018 North Haven Fire Commission meeting to order. I'll ask for the approvals of the minute of the Board of Fire Commission meeting held on September 25th, 2018.
So move.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any question on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. The Chief's report.
Chief's report for this month. I'm going to start with the alarms. Cover 2017. At this time, we were at 3,986 calls. 2018 at this time, we're at 4,211, a difference of 225 alarms. If you go look back over a 5-year period, back in 2013, we're at 3,729 at this point in time in the year, difference of 482 more calls today than 5 years ago. Since our last Board of Fire Commission meeting, we provided ALS intercept, meaning our paramedic road to the hospital, on 23 different incidents, and we've had 19 different incident responses to the highway. 68% of our calls have been EMS related since our last meeting, and we are unable to respond to 3 different incidents. Now, I just want to explain what that is. So there's a few different things that are taking place here. So I've been asked to make it clear that while the fire department wasn't able to respond, an ambulance was responding. Now, this accounts only for those incidents in which there was no fire department resource able to respond at the time of dispatch. It doesn't account for significant delays. It doesn't account for how many times we perhaps responded to a scene and we didn't have enough personnel. This is just how many times we had nobody to respond. And we can, we'll probably talk about that some more later, because I know that's gonna come up. Approximately 432 incidents since our last meeting, 102 of which were overlapping, which accounts for 24% of our calls occurring at the same time. That's what I have for alarms. Regarding our current budget, year to date, as of this point last year, we are at 44.6%. Year to date this year, 47.2%. Not much of a difference. And since our last Board of Fire Commission meeting, we've collected $85,256 in permit fees, bringing our overall total this fiscal year to $302,152. Regarding the fire marshal's report, we've conducted 35 inspections, 9 re-inspections for a total of 44 inspections. One thing I just want to point out is that we've had a number of significant fires occur over the last few weeks, and the same staff that conduct the inspections and take care of the permits and so forth is the same staff that are investigating the fires. And with that is not only the aftermath of the fire, but it's numerous reports, collection of photos, organization and labeling of all the evidence, meeting with prosecutors in some case, meeting with the insurance company, meeting with the landlord, meeting with the homeowner. I mean, so it's just a thing important to note that when we catch a lot of these fires that we've been catching lately, it takes inspections down a priority because the fires need to be investigated and dealt with in a timely manner. We have 2 abatement orders out right now, and over the course of since our last meeting, we reviewed 40 different plan reviews or permits. Some of the more pressing matters right now in the fire marshal's office in terms of inspection activity continues to be the Amazon property inspection. The fire protection systems is ongoing there, flushing out and witnessing the flushing of the fire mains and the hydrants and so forth, and the risers for the sprinklers. 2 on Clintonville Road, the North Haven Senior Living. We've already began doing similar inspections at that location. There's a location in town that we've had to become involved with ATF because of an audit that took place there, and a number of explosives that are held on site. And we've also been involved in an abatement order of a multifamily home in town that's taken up a lot of time as well. Regarding training, since our last meeting, we've conducted training regarding accountability and hose advancement, and for executive session, I have a few personnel matters to discuss with the commission. And that's all I have for Chief's report.
That'd be fine. Any question of the chief regarding his report? Yes.
Chief, referring to AMR, are they gonna be stationed here permanently at the old Geico insurance place?
So they don't have a station permanently in North Haven. They lease that space in Washington Avenue.
Yeah,
There's sometimes an ambulance there. There's sometimes not an ambulance there. They're under no obligation to keep an ambulance in town. They attempt to, based on conversations we've had with them recently, they attempt to keep an ambulance or two in town as often as possible, but there are still multiple times throughout the day that there is no ambulance in town at all from AMR.
Any other questions of the chief?
Just a quick thing. On the fees for the permit, that was 300,000 up to approximately 300,000 up
So
to
this
this point?
fiscal year, 302,152.
So that's about $30,000 a month that we're taking in approximately?
It was 85,256
Just this month?
Just this month.
But overall, we're doing over,
Yeah, so remember, fiscal year started in July.
right, that's right, started in July.
Correct.
Right.
So we're doing 60,000 a month average. That's just fantastic. That's a lot of money that we're talking about. Probably, we're averaging $1 million a year. About
Yeah, so since we started collecting fees, we're at 1.5.
1.5, well, a year and a half?
Thereabouts, yeah.
So about $1 million a year. I mean, with money like that we're collecting, I hope that the fire department itself is benefiting from some of that money.
Well, we shall see. Obviously, our proposals during the workshop, when the chief presents, hopefully that will be taken into consideration.
I hope they actually do
Yeah.
take that.
Yeah, and
because-
it's just worth noting as well that the monies collected offsets the consultant fee that we pay for the inspector, and most recently, a second clerical position that at this point is part-time. But it's important to note that, we weren't doing these inspections all along. And so with the inspections comes phone calls for scheduling, follow-up letters, initial letters, and a number, I'm minimizing it by just saying those things. And so with that comes an additional clerical duty. And so those two individuals are compensated solely through this permit collection. However, there is still money above and beyond, obviously, that's available.
Absolutely, no, that was a great thing you came up with, that was a great job, and the inspector is doing a fantastic job. So,
Certainly, when you look at the violations that were in existence for God knows how many years prior to the inspections taking place, and then, just as the chief reported, there are significant violations that have been identified and rectified, and potentially countless lives were saved in fires and other injuries as a result of the effort of the fire marshal's office. So I think this is certainly Jim has done a marvelous job thus far, and we appreciate his effort. And I heard personally from a resident in town who recently had an oil tank removed, and I guess Jim had to go there to sign off indicating that it in fact was removed correctly. Indicated that he was very professional, very courteous, and they appreciated the fact that he was there to oversee the removal.
There's no doubt that Jim is a professional.
Yep.
It's one of the reasons why he was chosen to be hired as well was his previous experience with an Amazon development in Windsor, and he's overseeing that along with Deputy Chief Marcarelli, and it's definitely paying off. He knows the people already that were established in the building of Amazon. It's something else that you're not necessarily seeing, but that we see on the line side is there's a number of times you have alarms and systems in town that they're constantly going off, the repeat offenders, if you will. With the fire inspector now, the shift commander typically comes back and says, listen, we've been to this alarm 3 times in the last couple of days, can you check it out? And those were always alarms. And now he's able to go and trace those problems down and make contact with those landlords and cut down on the number of alarms. Now, you're not seeing it in our alarms because they continue to grow, but if that not were occurring, our alarms would be even higher than they are now, because he is really able to chase down a lot of the fire alarms, the false alarms that we were responding to previously.
So he's able to work with the landlord and then the company that is servicing their alarm to find out where the problem is,
Right.
to prevent that from occurring.
Correct.
Great.
No, he's doing a great job. And
Yeah.
just the buildings that he's actually saving by being out there and correcting these problems before they become a catastrophe.
And minimizing liability for the town,
Yes.
because it was a ministerial act that we were supposed to have been completing all along.
Right.
Hats off.
Okay. I'll accept the motion to accept the chief's report.
So move.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any question on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Correspondence.
Correspondence, I have one listed on your agenda. It's regarding the Stop the Bleed seminar that the North Haven Fire Department hosted at the North Haven High School for all district-wide school teachers and certified staff. This was held on November 6th, and I just got to plug Deputy Chief Martis for a moment. This all started because we had a collaborative safety meeting with the Board of Ed and some other individuals probably about a year ago, asked what we can do to continue to make schools safe, and this is an ongoing dialogue that we're involved with. But one of the things that came up was training all of the school teachers throughout the town on Stop the Bleed, which is really mass trauma, mass bleeding, secondary to, unfortunately, we have to face today, a shooting, but not only just that, but just a recess accident, a child gets hit by a car during pickup. I mean, anything like that could happen. It really is more likely to happen. We were the first, as we were told by the Office of Emergency Medical Services, we were the first town to have initiated this training for a district-wide event. So we were able to call upon instructors from all across the state of Connecticut and the region. A lot of our neighboring towns lended us equipment and instructors, and the teachers had a great time. So Dr. Cronin wrote a letter just expressing his thanks for the opportunity, and we'll do it again.
Well, that's certainly, it was a wonderful educational program that you put on, Deb, and we certainly appreciate it. I know after the program took place, the chief had spoken to me about it, told me that it was very well attended and very informative. I guess there was one component, some supplies that were in need in order to make sure that the schools had sufficient bandages in the event there was a catastrophic issue. I know our commissioner made a request to one of our partners in town to see if they would be able to underwrite the cost of that. So we're in the process, I believe, Mayor, to hear back from them during their next meeting.
Right.
Yeah. So we look forward to that, and it's the Rotary that Mary Jane has approached to underwrite the cost of that. So hopefully they look at that in their many requests as a request that would be important for the Board of Education, and certainly in partnership with the fire department. So thank you for coordinating that. We appreciate it. Any commissioners receive any verbal or written communications?
No, but I'd like to make a statement.
Please.
I'm speaking for the commission. I would like to thank the chiefs, the professional firefighters, the volunteers, and the fire police for the tremendous job they did up on Defco Park Road. And as most of you know, I make 90% of the fire, so I can talk. It was a great job done by everyone, and I'm proud of them all, everyone who was there. Matter of fact, I'm proud of all the firemen in town. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Very well said. Discussion of unfinished business for the fire department.
The only unfinished business I have for you tonight is the FEMA Assistance to Firefighters grant application. The application period closed on October 26th. We were able to submit grant applications that totaled 42 sets of personal protective equipment, so structural firefighter gear, at a value of $147,000. We also submitted an application for another engine, replacement engine pumper, at a value of $625,000. I don't know if I said it last meeting or not, but just before the application period, I contacted a representative that oversees the FEMA programs, and I just kind of expressed to him, hey, how did we look last year? Is this really worth pursuing again? And we were encouraged. We were in the running last year. It's just other towns just needed it more. You really are subject sometimes for these grants of just what other applicants are before the board up there. We were encouraged to submit for it again. We were encouraged to increase the value of our pumper. If you recall from last year, we put in for a pumper at about $400,000. Quite honestly, he said that's not enough. Make it more. If you get it, you get more. So we've upped that to $625. Now, we won't hear on these grant applications until probably beginning of March. And even then, it may go right into the summertime.
Well, certainly this commission appreciates the effort, and we know how much effort it takes to write these grants and prepare them and submit them on time. So thank you for orchestrating and coordinating that. Discussion of new business for the fire department. And Chief, I'd like you to address bullet number 2 first, and then we'll get into the finance subcommittee report.
Sure. So I have on the agenda replacing the damaged equipment, and it references an alarm number, 184176. And this is an incident that occurred the 24th of November in the early morning hours at 33 Defco Park Road, as has already been mentioned. I just want to cover a couple of things before I get into the cost. Firefighters on scene did an admirable job, and I say that, we say that for a lot of fires. It's different when you're going to a commercial fire and you've got fire through the roof on arrival. You got thick black smoke that's pushing out, that's ready to flash any point in time. And the guys go in and make an incredible stop. It's a 32,000 square foot building, and about 10,000 square feet of it was burning at the time of arrival. We knew there were chemicals in the building, but we also knew, because there were chemicals in the building, how bad it could get. Had we not made the stop that we did, we would have possibly polluted the water system, drinking water system. We would have impacted water runoff into the Quinnipiac River and ultimately into the Long Island Sound, and we would have been looking at evacuating neighborhoods. We went in there and made an aggressive stop and stopped the fire, and there was chemicals involved, but the real bad chemicals hadn't been involved yet. But had we decided to let it burn, or had we had not been aggressive as we were, we'd be looking at a completely different scene than we are right now. But with that aggressiveness comes some inherent risks, and what our firefighters were exposed to were a number of acids and corrosives that were either actively, they were in liquid form, but they were becoming a gas because of the heat environment inside that building. And they were involved in the fire. They were leaking in some cases. The containers were compromised that they were stored in, so they were actively coming out onto the floor where our firefighters were crawling. And they were actively gassing, which means that they were going up with the smoke. We had firefighters inside actively making an aggressive fire attack to stop the fire from going to the rest of the building. And we had to do that. You also have to vent from the roof, which means you're putting guys directly in line with the smoke. Fortunately, at this point, I have no injuries to report. I have a number of exposures, which we'll continue to deal with for the foreseeable future. But I do have a lot of equipment that has been rendered useless at this point. And so that's what we're still working to identify exactly what that is. But if you think about it in terms of when you have any kind of structural firefighter gear that's made contact with a corrosive like an acid, it's going to degrade it over time. The other thing that's going to happen with acids in the air is it's going to get inside of all the metals. It could get inside of our air packs. It's going to impact rubber, plastics. It's going to degrade all of that over time. So while right now, looking at everything, it may look okay, what we can't guarantee is what's going to happen as the next few weeks, few months, or maybe even a couple of years go by, depending on the level of exposure. So with that, we've been in touch with our vendors, and they've been in touch with the manufacturers for all the equipment. And it's been 2 business days, yesterday and today, that we've been doing nothing other than this, really trying to identify what needs to be replaced. Initial findings at this point are we may have to replace all the air packs that were used and all of the gear that was being worn, and we're looking at several $100,000. We've been in contact with Mike Frieda's office, and Mike is wholly supportive of replacing all the equipment in whatever means necessary, and we're working on issuing POs this week, because right now, when I say we're operating on a shoestring department, I really mean that. I mean, if it was much worse, we wouldn't be able to provide services right now. We're able to find enough leftovers and scraps, if you will, and we're able to tap into some departments that have some inventory that's available to us to borrow until we can get permanent replacements in. And you're looking at replacements, depending on the item, anywhere from a few days for some of the smaller items like boots and hoods and gloves, to gear, which needs to be custom fit for each individual firefighter. And while we're going to get moved to the top of the list, you're still looking at about 3 to 4 weeks. So for the next several weeks, we're in rough shape right now. We're going to be able to, looks like, borrow some air packs from a neighboring town or a nearby town, and still at least be able to be functional and operational. But I just wanted the commission to be aware of the extent of the damage. And again, I think it's just important to note, looking at it right now, it looks okay, but every manufacturer, one by one, is getting a list of the chemicals that we know that were involved in the fire. We provide them that list, and they start looking at the chemicals, they start looking at the background of them, and they say, warranty's no good. And the last thing you want to do is have a firefighter who is going to be involved in an incident, let's say 3 years from now, suffer some kind of injury, God forbid a death, and we can trace back anything that he's wearing or using to this incident. So that's why no manufacturer is going to stand behind their warranties at this point.
All right, Chief, right now, all the PPE equipment and helmets and gloves and boots that the firefighters were wearing, are they all sealed up now?
Yeah, everything right now, all the PPE, all the equipment is sealed up and bagged and is going to be disposed of by an environmental cleaning company.
Okay. And you said you found bits and scraps of PPE equipment. So obviously, if I'm on duty and you're on duty, or you're not on duty, I can't borrow your suit.
Yeah, that's
because
exactly-
it would be
that's exactly what's
it would be a little bit
happening.
of a problem here.
there's a lot of-
So how do we do that?
There's a lot of borrowing, there's a lot of imagination that went into this right now. But we're fortunate that a lot of the gear that was affected was that of our career staff, and our career staff has 2 sets of gear. Because when they get back from a fire and they're completely soaked and they're still on duty for the next several hours, they need to be the ability to put on a new set of gear to be able to go to work. So really, when we look at it, we're looking at a lot of the volunteers that are adversely impacted at this point, and we're able to kind of move some things around and shuffle some things around. Again, it's not a long-term solution, but we're going to make it work.
Okay.
Chief, what about these white uniforms you see on television when they are going into a contaminated area? Maybe we should carry some on the trucks.
Yeah, the problem with a lot of those is they're not necessarily flame resistant. So, a lot of those, you're to get some that are then, stand up to the temperatures that we're dealing with, you're looking at a whole different set of equipment at this point. As we began to find out what was involved and put the fire out, we changed our tactics. But again, it was too late at that point. And had we allowed it to burn, we'd have been evacuating neighborhoods right in this area.
It would have been an environmental nightmare, and kudos to your staff and certainly you as the chief and the deputies that were there on scene, and all the firefighters. I know firsthand that volunteers were there, and it's deeply appreciated by this commission that the volunteers stepped out and assisted our paid guys. Do we call in any other off-duty staff, Chief?
Yeah, so there was additional career staff that was brought in to handle additional calls occurring in town. We called in the town of Hamden, the town of Wallingford, and the town of North Branford as well. So we had a lot of personnel there, and it's important to know that we have 30 to 40 sites like this in town that have these types of chemicals in them. This is unusual to have a fire in one of those because of just the odds. There's others in town.
Okay. Now, I know we talked about this earlier, and obviously the expectation is that if we're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment that is no longer operable for us, the expectation is that the town insurance company will go after the insurance company of the business and subrogate against that insurance company to attempt to make the town whole. But in the meantime, obviously, we need to operate the fire department, so we need to front the money. And I had a discussion with Mike Fried at 8 o'clock this morning, indicating that they're going to do whatever is necessary to make sure that our firefighters are safe and that they have the appropriate equipment. And as the chief indicated, it's going to take some time, depending on the equipment, and then manufacturer, as to how swiftly we're going to be able to get everyone fully suited with their own specific PPE equipment. So, you know, I think this is important information for the residents of this town to understand. It's a significant amount of equipment that we're going to be, we've lost. But certainly, we're going to be able to replenish it as quickly as we possibly can. Any questions of the chief regarding the equipment and the issues?
Chief, did the other towns lose equipment also?
Yeah, so one of the towns had their staff involved in fire suppression efforts, that they were exposed in much in the same way that our staff was, and we're disposing of that equipment for them through the environmental contractor, and we're working to determine how to best replace that. If it's going to be a separate insurance claim through that town, if they're going to be able to tie into ours, that's still kind of evolving over the last couple of days to figure out what the best course of action is for that. But yeah, and that's something to think about. You know, is that when we call on our towns to help, we certainly don't want to burden them with a cost, but they're impacted as well. Yeah.
That'd be an interesting question for the town attorney as to, you know, if we call a town in for mutual aid, does our liability cover those firefighters while they're assisting us? I mean, that's an interesting question.
So the town attorney's been involved in this, as well as insurance as of yesterday morning.
I would just like to add, if I could, a thank you to Officer Esterby of the North Haven Police Department. Officer Esterby was actually stationed across the street at Brescombe and Barton working an overtime assignment guarding the trucks because they were loaded and unable to deliver. And his vigilance, he noticed the smoke coming from the rear of the structure, proceeded to investigate, and the investigative department is actually working on whether or not there was an issue with the alarm system. So we were never issued a fire alarm. If Officer Esterby had not been vigilantly doing his duties at Brescombe and Barton and noticed the smoke from across the street, then we would not have been able to be as aggressive and control it. So I think a big shout out to our brothers in blue and specifically him for being aware and astute and calling in that fire.
Absolutely. This commission certainly appreciates his effort and certainly the effort of the North Haven Police Department. I mean, we work day to day with our fellow brothers and sisters in blue, and they do a marvelous job. So kudos to them, and thank you for a job well done, certainly. The second item on the new business heading indicates that the Board of Finance Subcommittee report has been submitted to us. Each of our commissioners have had an opportunity to review and digest the report. I'd like to ask the chief to say a few comments before we get moving on this.
Commissioner, can I just ask one thing?
Yes.
Do you want to hold that and go to 6 and finish 6 out and then go back and we could,
We absolutely can. That's fine. That way, because this is going to take.
this way it's going to take some time, we could just,
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a good point. Thank you very much. Discussion of the good of the fire department.
So good of the department, I have, just want to make the commission and those watching aware of fundraisers taking place for a 40-year veteran of the North Haven Fire Department as a volunteer, Howie Capetta. He's he's going through some tough times right now, and there's a fundraiser for him taking place on Friday, November 30th, from 5 to 9 at the Hope Christian Church. We'd ask anybody that can attend to please do so. Again, Howie has been a staple to the Mono East station on that side of town for a long time, and has really influenced a lot of people. So anybody that can attend that, we'll ask that they do so. The holiday season's upon us. Next time we meet, it's going to be practically Christmas time. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware the volunteer firefighters will be collecting food and toys over the next few weeks outside of a number of businesses here in town. We ask that you support their efforts. They do a great job every year, and they're able to deliver a lot of toys to the Yale Children's Hospital, and as well as stock up the food shelves here in our own local food pantry. And the volunteer associations, just to remind people that each of the 3 outlying stations have their own respective volunteer fire associations, and they're running the Santa runs this year. You can check out social media and so forth to figure out which district you live in, and even that doesn't matter as much as the contact information that you can set that up so that Santa can deliver presents to your kids. And that's all I have for the department.
Very good. Any commissioners have anything to add? I would also like to encourage everyone to attend the fundraiser in honor of Howie Capetta. He's been a staple in our fire service for 40 years, a gentleman, a fire enthusiast, fire equipment enthusiast. He has retired fire trucks that he's renovated and has participated in numerous parades. And he's certainly very well deserving of this fundraiser and is in need. So please be kind enough to purchase tickets or make a donation. Let's get back to the new business of the fire department, and we're going to address the Fire Medical Services Workshop Group that was established on November 14th, 2008. I'm sorry, it wasn't established then. It was established on April 17th. Chief, please.
Yeah, so I can give you the background on this, just for the viewing audience and those in the room that are here for this purpose. Is the last budget workshop that I had, it was quite long. We covered a lot of material, and Mike Frieda, I think, heard our concerns and put $140,000 aside in a line specific for addressing the needs of the fire department, and it was to be determined exactly how that money would be appropriated. So with that, there was a committee established that involved Rich Monaco, Mike Callahan, myself, Deputy Chief Martis, and Ed Zbigkowski. And what you have before you is a report, and I just think it's important to note that this is not a consensus report. This is a report from 2 members of the Board of Finance. I think we've come a long ways. This was I want to say 7 meetings, 21 hours, because each meeting was about 3 hours long, and some went longer. The prep time that went into it, you're talking a lot of hours here, and I think that's to be commended. We covered a lot of material, as can be seen from the list of dates they have here, and they were very systematic and organized in how they wanted to be presented with information. So I applaud them for that. Overall, there's some elements of this that I agree with. There's others that I don't. I think there's still a lot of opportunities. The plan that I had presented during the workshop addressed 3 critical needs. It addressed additional firefighters, it addressed additional paramedics, and it addressed additional apparatus that are needed to respond to incidents occurring in town. So it comes down to what's really best for the public, and that's really what I do with every decision that I make, is determine what's best for the public. While money's a factor in that, it's not the deciding factor for me. I've got to look at the public safety of the town, and with that, the best way of accomplishing that. So again, I think really at the foundation is it comes down to what is an acceptable level of risk the public's willing to take. And I think depending on what what board you're on or who you represent or whatever. I think it depends a lot on what your final answer is going to be. And I think at the end of the day, this really needs to go down to the public. And I believe wholeheartedly in transparency, which is why this report's been shared as much as it has. And I'll make sure that I have a report out to everybody as well shortly. But I don't think it's uncommon for financial boards to differ with fire chiefs on matters like this. But I do think that it's something that needs to get out and discussed in a forum such as this, or in the workshops, or in further meetings. Overall, we're getting busier every year. You heard me read the stats today about how we were last year, how we are 5 years ago. And if we could cap our calls right where they are right now, we could accept this risk. Perhaps we could. Perhaps we can say, hey, we're missing this many calls, and statistically, this is what it's going to stay. But we know that's not the case. When we trend the calls, and the reason why I digress with the data and the call stats and everything I do every month is because I'm looking at the trend, and I know what's going to happen. You look at the aging population that we have in town, that's 5% more than the state average, and you look at the boom of economic development taking place in town, and it's something that we can forecast is going to impact our call volume further. So that risk is going to get greater and greater. So my job is not only to respond to emergency incidents as we did the other night, Defco Park Road, it's also to plan for them. And when we look at the planning of it, we need to make sure that we have the apparatus and the staffing and so forth to be able to perform our job as we're asked to do. Where I believe that I differ with this report from the Board of Finance is what the public expectations are. I've worked for this town now for about 18 years. I don't think that we're expected to cover a plane crash on our own, or cover a train derailment on our own, or cover any mass casualty that's going to occur. But I do feel that we're expected to respond to every incident that's occurring in town, to have the staff available to do so, and that as the town continues to grow, the fire department continues to grow. So to address this, we need to start looking at what we can do to keep up with the demands of our department, keep up with the services that we've always provided. Call volume is the single most important predicator of how much resources you need for a fire department. We're going to be hitting 5,000 calls here pretty soon. The last time we hit 5,000 calls, leadership in town said, hey, that's getting to be a lot. We got to figure out a way to cut down on how many calls we're going to. And there was efforts made to cut back on the non-emergent calls that we were going to. So that took out 800 calls. We went from about 5,000 down to 4,200. Well, that was back in 2009. And now we're creeping up again. Now we're getting back up to that number where it could be perceived as a breaking point. When you look at Amazon, the Clintonville Road development, the Bradley Homes, and all the others that are occurring in town, economic development has outpaced the growth of the fire department in town. It's my opinion the public expects the department to continue to provide the same services that we've always provided. And as we grow economic development in town, we're growing our fire department to continue providing the same continuity of services that we've always provided. I have some grave concerns over the availability of our only staffed engine being tied up at an incident in town, and then relying on volunteers who, they're going to try their best, and they're going to go at everything that they can. But if working families today, and with membership down like it is everywhere in the nation, we need to just come to the realization that there may not always be another engine coming on the air. So then I hear, well, let's call mutual aid. And those people who say let's call mutual aid really don't understand how mutual aid works. You're not going to call for mutual aid for the scene that you have nobody on scene yet, you don't even know what you have. You call mutual aid when you arrive on scene and you realize that what you're dealing with right now, you don't have the resources to call upon. But you're not calling mutual aid from the initial dispatch. And that's where we continue to kind of play that risk is we tie up all 3 headquarters units, the same 3 been running now for 45 years, and we play the statistical odds that the next call that's going to come in, it's going to be a medical call and the ambulance is going. And I think that's what it comes down to is what does the public really expect? The ambulance is going to be minutes in arriving. We had 2 incidents recently where the ambulance took an upwards of 25 minutes to arrive on scene. We had fire resources on scene, but had we not had fire resources on scene, that person called 911 for a medical emergency and has nobody showing up at their door front for 25 minutes. So the expectation of the public is that when they're having a medical emergency, the fire department can respond. Not, all right, well, the ambulance will go, because we can't cover it. And I truly feel that way, and which is why I'm advocating the way that I am, and I'm putting myself out there. You know, I don't think that if we're 6, 7, 8 calls deep inside of an hour, I can explain that. I can show that as, hey, that was extraordinarily busy that day, and we don't normally see call volume like that. But when we're looking at trends of 3, 4 calls occurring at the same time every single day, that's no longer a spike in call volume. That's your call volume. That's what you need to staff and prepare for in this town. You know, you look at just some suggestions that were made in this report, and it talks about, you know, bringing firefighters in Monday through Friday during the day. I'd ask, and if, you know, we get into the point tonight, we can discuss it, but I'd ask you to go back to my budget presentation, and there's no Monday through Friday is no busier than Saturday and Sunday. There's also no 8-hour period in the course of a day that's any busier than another 8-hour period of time. There's a downward slide perhaps in the overnight hours when the call volume is not as high as the remaining, let's say 12 hours, 14, 16 hours of a day. But in that overnight period is when you find your most serious calls occurring. And you really need to make sure you have the staff available. So I'd ask that, you know, as we go through this, that we just kind of keep that in mind, is what are the expectations of the public? And do they really know what the capabilities are of the department so that they can identify what the risk is? You know, I've been accused of being an alarmist. I've been told by others to have people rein me in. I've been told I've been trying to build an empire. And I don't think that's accurate at all. All I'm trying to do is adequately prepare the department for the calls that we face every day. And, you know, it upsets me when you look at the fact that we've been running 3 apparatus for 45 years in North Haven. And all we're looking to do is add another apparatus to continue covering the calls that we're tasked to respond to every day. 16 was a lot of firefighters to ask for. You know, in retrospect, perhaps that wasn't the right way to go about it. Be the first one to admit it, because people heard 16 and that's what they caught on to. 16 was to make us eligible for a grant. If we don't want the grant, we don't have to go for 16, which is why I said let's hire 8. Let's hire 8 and figure out where to go from there. As a budget presentation went on, it turned from, you know, let's hire 2. And we're okay with that as well. I'm not saying that we suddenly need to you know, hire all these firefighters at the same time, but we've got to start taking a systematic approach to how we're going to address the staffing in the department for the first time in a long time. We added a firefighter in 2009. That didn't add any apparatus on the streets. You know, I fear that some are looking at the issues I presented for the FD one-dimensionally. What's it going to cost? I live in this town. I coach youth football in this town. I'm on a PTA board in this town. I see taxpayers every day. They don't want their taxes to go up. I know it. We all know it. But when you talk with them about the needs of public safety in this town, the first thing they say to me is, you know what, if my taxes were going to go up because of public safety, I'd have no problem with it. And so I just want the public to just listen to these suggestions and open their minds up. And I've got no problem if this is what the public is looking to support. I've got no problem at all. I've put it out there. I've explained, at least for those that are willing to listen, the risks that are associated with how we're running our department right now. And I don't think that the contents of this is something that's going to address all of those needs. Again, those 3 critical needs: additional firefighters, additional paramedic, and additional apparatus responding. So with that, I'd invite the commission to you know, go through this and discuss it. I can certainly elaborate on some different points if you'd like.
Chief, thank you for your comments, and for the publics and for our audience that's here this evening, and it makes my heart feel good to see as many people here that are interested in what has been presented and what's going on with our fire commission. Keep in mind that under this current budget, Mike Frieda set aside $140,000 earmarked for the fire department. As the chief indicated, a subcommittee was created, and that subcommittee was was charged with to gather information, evaluate procedures and policies, and develop recommendations concerning resource allocation and other issues affecting the town of North Haven Fire and Medical Services. When I heard that, I immediately indicated that I take offense to that. I said it was an insult to our chief and our senior managers, who have over 65 years of senior management fire experience, have multiple degrees in fire science, have multiple training sessions under their belts, and are expert in their profession. I made my feelings public then, and I'm making them public again now. I resented the fact that non-fire professionals were making fire decisions, if you will, and that quickly turned from fire decisions to fire recommendations. And I applaud Mike Frieda for indicating that the jurisdiction over the fire department lays right here in the hands of the Fire Commission. We have been duly elected by the public to oversee the fire department as a commission. We are a bipartisan organization that works very harmoniously for the best interest of the fire department. We take certainly the guidance from our senior managers, and specifically the chief, as to what the needs and of the department are. We digest that information, and we either agree or disagree or fine-tune and tweak and come up with a solution. I applaud the subcommittee for the dedication and the time and effort that they put into this. And I said the same thing to our third selectwoman, who we all know has been very vocal and has communicated with a number of chiefs and departments around the state, asking what goes on in their specific towns. And I know this subcommittee has done the same thing. But the truth of the matter, as far as I'm concerned, is that North Haven is North Haven. We have our own specific sets of issues and concerns as it pertains to our town, our demographics, our volunteers, our paid staff, and our senior management. And our senior management knows the specific needs and of what our department are in order to perform the duties that we're sworn to perform for the residents, business owners, and visitors of our town. So I believe that their hearts are all in the right place, but the truth of the matter is how we're getting to the goal line, I believe lies with our senior manager's skill and expertise, not with skill and expertise from someone who might be a professional in another profession. So having said that, the report was provided for us shortly after the last Board of Finance meeting. There was initial discussion that it was going to be online, and there was further discussion that it would be unfair to put it online immediately without our fire commission having an opportunity to read it and digest it and have this discussion before others had the opportunity to review it, considering that it is our state responsibility as fire commissioners to review and make suggestions to the senior management. So, having said that, I indicated at the Board of Finance meeting that we will go through every line of this proposal publicly. We will make our decision as to what our recommendation to the chief and to the Board of Selectmen, in particular to Mike Frieda, we will make that publicly tonight in front of this audience, in front of the public. We are not going to adjourn into executive session to make that decision. We will make it after we each have discussed each line item in the proposal. So I'm going to start. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read what the workshop group recommendation is by number. I'm going to ask the chief what impact those proposals will have on our operations, and then I'll say whatever I feel, and I'm going to ask each of our commissioners to articulate what their feeling is on that particular item. So, from the workshop participants, Rich Monaco, Michael Hallahan, the following recommendations represent financially feasible changes, additions to the North Haven Fire Department's human, physical, logistical resources intended to improve the department's ability to fulfill their fire medical emergency service responsibilities with estimated costs. And I want to refer back to an item, a comment that the chief made. These recommendations were not totally agreed upon by the committee that sat together, which was certainly Rich Monaco, Mike Hallahan, Deputy Martis, Chief Januszewski, and Ed Swinkowski, our finance director. All 5 of those persons were not in agreement with the final results that came out of that subcommittee. This is, in my estimation, this is an overview of what Richard Monaco and Michael Hallahan created. I'm not sure how much of a contribution Ed Swinkowski had on the actual creation of the document itself. Chief, you might be able to speak to that better than I. But the truth of the matter is, I think the chief clearly indicated that he has not been, and the deputy is not, in favor of much of what this report includes. So having said that, number 1, basic life support, BLS, public service area responder, PSAR, modifications to specifications of BLS, PSAR holder, or some contractor vendor. A, currently, the BLS PASR is held by American Medical Response. The North Haven Fire Department is in the process of appealing the State Office of Emergency Management, OEM, to acquire this designation. If acquisition is approved by OEM, subcontract the BLS PASR function to the accredited ambulance service with specifications listed below. Whether or not the acquisition is approved contractually requires the BLS PASR holder or subcontractor to perform with the following additional requirements. I'm not going to read what the other requirements are, because I'm going to say to you that we are currently in litigation, if you will, to pull back the PSA. And I think by discussing further what the recommendation of the subcommittee is regarding this is premature. I think we need to wait until the lawyers approach the subject, and I think once that takes place, then we could then acknowledge what, if we're successful in taking the PSA back, what our goals and objectives would be. Chief, do you have any comment regarding that?
Yeah, so just to make sure that anybody who's coming into this and isn't following this up until this point, the PSA is basically the license that allows an ambulance company to operate in town and transport all patients.
And excuse me, that PSA was issued by the state of Connecticut?
Yeah,
Many years ago?
Yeah.
And so we've had no control over that since the state contracted with the ambulance company.
Yeah, so essentially every town in the state of Connecticut has a PSA holder. In many cases, it's a commercial ambulance service. When this was done back in the 60s, 70s, whatever it was, there was no, fire departments weren't really involved in EMS yet, and there was no really foresight in terms of what this would mean for the future. So long story short, the PSA is what allows a company to transport. We can't start transporting patients ourselves. We can't have another company start transporting. It is a license held by a commercial company. In this case, it's AMR. A lot of the terms that are identified. Here's the thing. I've been an advocate for pursuing the PSA for 4 years now, through several conversations with Mike Frieda. Because he wasn't sure what was involved in the process. we've been able to agree that we're going to pursue the PSA ourselves. So this fire administration has been pushing for this. I'm not going to get into the details in terms of everything else because it's all being negotiated now and being proposed now, and I can guarantee that if we were to discuss it further, it could potentially be used against us. So just understand that it's something that we're working on, and the reason that we're pursuing it is because I truly believe that emergency response within a town is a core function of public safety and public government, not of commercial interests. So that's the reason why we're looking for the PSA to be assigned to the town of North Haven. We have to go through a hearing process with the state in order to do that, and we're going back and forth now on language in terms of what that's going to include. And our intent would be to be assigned the PSA by the state of Connecticut, and we would contract out EMS services in town, and we would do it under our terms, some of which would include the rest of the items there.
Okay. Each of the commissioners, I'm going to ask you if you have any comments or if you're in agreement with making no comment as a result of litigation that's in process.
Correct.
Yes.
Commissioners, any question?
No questions.
Okay. So we're all in agreement. Number one, there'll be no comment due to litigation that is in progress,
Correct.
Other than just supporting the ongoing PSA pursuit, right?
which is correct.
Yeah.
Just, right.
Right. Number two, emergency dispatch. The subcommittee went into emergency dispatch and they put a $400,000 price tag alongside of it. Emergency dispatch does not come under the jurisdiction of this commission. It comes under the jurisdiction of the police commission and the chief of police. Certainly dispatches calls to fire and police, but certainly does not come under our umbrella. My expectation is that this commission, as well as our chief, will work cooperatively with the police commission and the police chief regarding dispatch. I think, considering it's not part of our umbrella, I don't think that we have anything to say about it at this point. Chief, does this have any impact on our operations?
So there's some discussion that it may, and here's the thing, well, you're right, the administration of dispatch falls under the police department. There's no disputing that the operation of dispatch directly impacts the fire department. So, in the course of discussing this with the subcommittee, they kind of needed to hear the evolution of a 911 call in order to really wrap around their minds around how resources are then allocated based on the 911 call. And so we covered in detail a lot of this. In fact, I don't know that it's noted in here, but I think that might have been the first meeting that was covered. And then, we kind of threw the brakes up and said, we really want to discuss this with the police department and their administration because this does fall under their authority. And so the police chief and others attended a meeting thereafter in which this was discussed more, and really our claims in terms of how it operated were validated. I think the two things that are worth pointing out are items C and D, directing all routine transport calls originating from clinics, medical and healthcare facilities to the non-911 phone line of the basic life support holder. Just understand that in a lot of ways it's happening now. It's just a matter of ensuring that it's continuing to happen. Just understand that if the way that, what an EMD is emergency medical dispatching. So when somebody calls 911, you're asked a series of questions to determine what type of medical emergency is taking place and what priority is going to be assigned to that call. That's what EMD is. Now, the town of North Haven currently does not provide EMD. It was contracted out to AMR a number of years ago prior to my tenure as chief. And what's happening now is when somebody calls 911, they're asked, let's say, 6 questions, enough to find out what's going on. And then they're transferred to AMR and they're asked those same 6 questions plus about 3 or 4 others. So there's an inherent delay in response. There's obviously some frustration sometimes in a 911 caller because they're being asked these questions, they're being transferred, they don't really understand what's taking place, and they're obviously dealing with an emergency. So this is, we had to subcontract out the EMD service because we didn't have enough dispatchers in the 911 center to simultaneously answer 911 calls, dispatch police, dispatch fire, and stay on the phone with the 911 caller at times to find out what's going on. So by hiring these dispatchers, we'll be able to start providing the EMD service once again, which is a better public service, which provides a whole lot of other operational benefits. I'll give you an example. A person calls saying that they were just assaulted. They have injuries. All right, well, then we're going to start responding to the call. And then once the call is transferred to the service providing the EMD, lo and behold, the person who assaulted this individual is coming back to the scene. Well, we're not going to know that going to the call, because now the call is no longer being handled by our dispatch center. It's somewhere else. It's just a quick example of some of the times that we get to a scene and we really could have had our dispatcher on the phone getting more information, because it would have helped our responding units learn more. The other thing is, as part of the initial EMD process, item number D, screen 911 calls to identify non-emergency queries not requiring ALS resources and assign exclusively to the BLS responder. We covered in detail that because we have so many healthcare facilities in town, they still do require the response of 911 services. Whether or not there's a physician or a PA on scene or not, it doesn't matter. They are outside of their license if they begin treating anybody for a 911 call, so they have to call 911. And it is state regulation that if an ambulance is responding on a priority 1 call to North Haven, the fire department has to be notified, because we are the first responders and we are also the R5 holders and paramedic holders. So the intent with this is to hopefully minimize the number of times that we're dispatched to calls that we may not have to be dispatched. But as I explained to the members of the Board of Finance, you're not looking at that many calls. I would say you're maybe looking at a decrease of 30 calls a year. The amount of times that we're going to calls that we didn't have to respond are not going to be that many. This isn't going to make a big dent, but it is going to drastically improve services for police and fire.
And one of the things I would like to add on that service, as the chief was mentioning, was right now, and we've talked a lot about the lottery system of the North Haven Fire Department. If you call 911 first, you're lucky, you get a paramedic. If you call 911 second, you're not. Even if we had multiple paramedics in the building, at some point in time, you're going to run out of paramedic units, and a basic life support non-paramedic fire unit is going to be responding. With the EMD being in-house, which is something we can't do right now, if somebody gets dispatched, say Rescue 1 goes out on a call for somebody who has a sprained ankle, which is a call that would require basic life support response, they're responding to the call, and then somebody else calls 911, and they get EMD'd appropriately to have a chest pain, which is now a paramedic call. The dispatcher now has the knowledge and authority to call Rescue 1 on the air and divert them from the ankle sprain to the chest pain, to the person having a heart attack, and then backfill that call with the basic life support unit out of fire headquarters. That is an invaluable service if you're the person that called second and is having a heart attack and needs to go to the cath lab. So when you look at EMD, that's something that we can't do, because the EMD codes are coming in after we're dispatched, and the way we get that information is spotty at best. So, we met with the chief and the police chief and deputy chief, and we support their push for this, but that's a huge service. I just wanted to add to that, what EMD really is and what could be used for.
Thanks for that explanation. In addition to what was just discussed, there was an instruct town hall switchboard operators to directly contact police or non-emergency calls to their appropriate extensions by providing a chart of assigned police extensions and numbers. Purchase and or develop a centralized after-hour phone answering service that will direct municipal calls to specific town extensions utilizing voicemail capabilities. I mean, you would think in today's day and age we would have that already, but this was part of what was proposed. Commissioners, Mary Jane, are you in agreement that this comes under the police
Yes.
jurisdiction and that we will work harmoniously with them?
Yes.
Commissioners?
Absolutely.
Joe?
Yeah.
Okay. So I will indicate that dispatch comes under the control of the police commission and chief. We will be willing to work with the PD to streamline dispatch for the fire department, and certainly the chief and the deputy will participate in that discussion. Number 3 is create a second 24/7 paramedic unit with a $60,000 price tag. Purchase and locate paramedic gear on engine 1. Establish a second paramedic unit. When possible, transfer paramedic responsibilities to ambulance paramedic to maintain preferred Engine 1 personnel requirements. Should fire department paramedic accompany a patient to the hospital, summon an overtime replacement to backfill the position, restoring the preferred personnel requirements of Engine 1. Chief, how does this impact our operation?
So this is viewed as a way to put a second paramedic on shift, and you know, there's a few realities to this. You know, while we have 11 paramedics right now, we have the staffing to do this. However, it's going to come at a cost. It's going to come at a strain. There's times that we struggle to maintain the one paramedic on shift just through the vacation schedule and so forth. So if this were to be done, it wouldn't be on a 24/7 basis. It would be on a basis of when we have a second paramedic on duty. I just think it's one of those things where we've got to really look at this, and I need to sit down with the union and discuss this some more, because it has some possible labor, implications to it as well. You know, I think it's important to remember that the reason that there's 4 firefighters in Engine 1 is because it's the only engine in town. In 2009, the reason we increased our staff by 4 firefighters, 1 per shift, was to put the 4th firefighter in the engine. We started a paramedic program at that time as well. By doing this, what you're doing is you're just making it much more difficult for that engine, which is the only suppression apparatus in town at this point, that's staffed to clear the call. And I kind of explain it like this. When a paramedic is involved in patient care, they're immensely involved in patient care. There is a series of tests they're doing on you. There's the LifePak 12 is hooked up to you, which is conducting whether it be a 12-lead analysis of your heart and a constant heart rhythm. There's meds that are being taken. There's vitals that are being taken. There's an IV that's being established. There's perhaps they're drilling into your bone. They're giving you IM meds that could be working in your airway. I mean, it's not the kind of thing where now when a fire comes in, the medic can suddenly clean up real fast and jump on the engine and go. I mean, there is going to be a delay in that. Is the engine already going to the call? Yeah, but they're not as committed because they don't have somebody that intimately involved in patient care. There's a reason why there hasn't been a paramedic placed on Engine 1 since 2009. And it's because we've identified the need for the fire suppression. And by doing this is making fire suppression less important than providing the paramedic. I'm gonna look to discuss this further and implement this out of reluctance. Listening to the public that say they want a second paramedic, this is something though that it's not going to solve our answers. If you look back at the fact that what we need is additional firefighters, additional apparatus, additional paramedic, all this is doing is putting an additional paramedic on at the cost of decreasing our staff available to respond to fires. That medic is going to ride into the hospital to get that engine back up to the staffing that we need, because we only have the one engine. I say it's because we have the one engine in town. It's going to take upwards of an hour to get another firefighter in from home to fill that seat. There's going to be a deficiency during that period of time, and there's times that engine never makes it back to the station. It'll just keep going, a call after call after call, never coming back to the station. So the firefighter that we call in is going to have to try to find a way to catch up with that engine somewhere in town to make that engine whole. And out of reluctance, we will look to implement that, because what I hear from the public is they want a second paramedic.
I'd like to add that I think point number 3 is the core of our argument for manpower. We've been saying we've had 3 apparatuses responding for 30-something years. This is taken away from that. Now you're putting a paramedic on the second responding unit. Our only engine is going on a medical call, as it's doing today. Should a fire company, a paramedic show up, that's not going to happen. The ambulance company is going to send us a BLS unit and take full advantage of our paramedic. And that paramedic is going to be riding in all day. And we're going to be chasing him around the city all day, trying to find out where he is and how we're going to get him back. And at the same time, again, the reason why we need a second apparatus to respond to medicals is to free up this paramedic. This is the worst possible place to put a paramedic, is our one and only suppression unit. And this is what they're asking us to do. We're taking a step backwards. at doing this.
Chief, I spoke to you about this being a sanitary thing. You're putting a paramedic on an engine, he goes to a car fire or a building fire, his hands are all greasy, his uniform is dirty, and now you've got to go and work on somebody who's been in an accident or a heart patient. It doesn't make sense to me.
Chief, just if I may.
Please.
It's going to sound redundant, but I'm going to probably repeat this through the entire letter that they sent us, or performance that we should be doing. It all goes back to the same thing. As the chairman said, there's over 65 years sitting up there, there's over 70 years sitting here, okay? You are in control. That's why you're the chief. You know what's best. On this, they want to put a paramedic on a 4-man engine. Right now, we're basically staffed properly, but we should have 5, as you well know. But we don't. We run with 4, but we should have 5 on the engine. Now you want to take and put a paramedic on our engine. Like you said, not to reiterate again, we're going to be stuck at a scene. Fire comes in on the other side of town. We can't move that apparatus, okay? We just can't pick up and leave once the paramedic is there. It's not like just an EMT. We can't pick up and leave. AMR, whatever ambulance service is going to be there, they are going to take full advantage of our paramedic, and they're not going to send another paramedic. So we're going to be stuck. He's going to ride down to the hospital. We're going to have to call a backup fireman at overtime. The expense is going to be 1.5 times, 5-6 days a week. We're going to chase this man around town due to the call volume that we have. So the town is going to spend a lot more money, and I know that the first selectman meant well. He put this $140,000 up for us to do this, and his intentions were good. Unfortunately, the Board of Finance, the 2 members, they're not equipped to deal with this. They don't even know the proper terminology. They want to put firefighters on day shifts. They want to put them on 1 day a week or 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. So should we tell the general public, let's listen to the Board of Finance, not to the chief who knows best, who's experienced in this. Let's listen to the Board of Finance and make sure the general public, you only get sick or need an emergency either on that 1 day that we have the extra paramedic on the first shift, that 1 day, 25% of our staffing, 1 day a week you get sick for the 24 hours, or go on the other recommendation that we have a day shift for 5 days a week from 8 to 4 or 8 to 3:30. Do not get sick before 8 a.m. in the morning. Do not have a heart attack after 3:30 in the afternoon, Monday through Friday. Should you have one on Friday, you can't get help until Monday morning, 8 o'clock. So I don't know where your family's going to store you during these hours. I hate to be so blunt and crude, but this is what it boils down to. The general public does not know what this Board of Finance is trying to do to the fire department and to the people of this town. We have a responsibility to keep you safe and to keep our men safe, our firefighters safe also, okay? They're taking that away from us. They're bringing us back 30 years. I'm not saying that they're not educated on the Board of Finance. They're just not educated in fire suppression, EMT, or paramedics. None of them. I'm one of the longest sitting commissioners, and I say that proudly, in the state of Connecticut, over 24 years. I don't know a tenth of what the chief knows. I wouldn't even think to know that. And here's 2 members of the Board of Finance that have no idea. They've learned a couple of new words that maybe the day that they were supposed to learn them, they were in class, but they came back and they learned a couple of new words: paramedics, EMTs, mutual aid. They want to break the union. They want to come in under union contracts, and they want to open up the contract on their own just because they want to do it. There's a union president sitting right here. Just don't open up a union contract. We're not union busters by any stretch of the imagination. So I don't know what they were thinking. Again, I am not by any stretch blaming the first selectman. His intentions were very well meant. He gave us $140,000 to start this. But I think when the Board of Finance took that, it became the tail wagging the dog. And this is what they're trying to do to the chief and the administration. They're wrong. It cannot happen. We will not allow it to happen. The people of this town will not allow it to happen. That's just why it should go out to the town. Write letters, call up, go to the newspaper, come to the chief's office. He's already inundated with calls, so he's going to get more. And I'm sorry to say that, Chief, okay? I'm sure the chairman's going to get calls and letters now. And you could send them to any one of us on the board. But we have to just remember one thing, and we're going to go through this whole litany of paperwork here. The bottom line is, this should be left to the chief. That's why he's the chief. It's the most emergency-funded project in any town is the fire department. The police obviously do what they have to do. Fire suppression, life-saving is our job, the fire department's job. And we have the best of the best sitting up there. Why are we second-guessing? Why are we having people from different boards? Okay? And I say this, the third selectman, the finance board is calling other towns to see how they operate. What if you call other towns like New Haven, cities, 320 firefighters, 320. They have more in one house than we have on our whole department. And we do, per volume, more calls than they do. We're putting out, what, 12,000, 13,000 miles a year on one piece of apparatus? The chief said we have, what, 4,200 calls? People think that that's 4,200 calls with all our apparatus going out, 3, 4, 5 pieces. No, that's per call. Some have one piece, some have 5 pieces of apparatus. So we could actually say, if you want to count them by apparatus, we do 10,000 calls if you do one piece at a time. That's the kind of volume this town does. Thank God we have the volunteers to come out. Though it's a low number, thank God we have them. Without them, we'd be in a lot of trouble. Trust me, we need them. But we need the chief to get what he needs to get. That's why he's the chief. We need to get behind the chief, and when he says we need 16 men, that was because of the grant. He was right on target. Now we need 8. We need a minimum of 8. 2 men to a shift, 2 firefighters to a shift, put on the next piece of apparatus. That's what we need. The Board of Finance has nothing to do with this board, commission, or the chief. He runs the department, and that's how it should be. And I'm sorry, Mr. Commissioner, if I got a little out of line here, but that's how I feel, and that will be what everything that's on here. It's the chief's decision. That's why we made him the chief, not other towns. We don't go to other towns. We don't ask taxpayers from other towns to pay for us. We don't want to take their advice. We have our own chief here, and we're very happy with him.
Thank you for your comments. Commissioner Morla? I'm sorry. Mulligan. I don't know. I used to be Morla. Mulligan.
We were close.
I did that twice already.
We were close.
I don't know.
I agree wholeheartedly with Peter, that's where all the expertise is right there. And they're the ones that should be making the decisions.
You're right. You know, my opinion here is that when you look at purchase and locate paramedic gear on engine 1, establish a second paramedic unit, obviously the residents of this town have requested additional paramedic service. 1 paramedic per shift is insufficient regarding the call volume. Certainly, if we put another paramedic on the engine, that would allow us to do that. As the deputy clearly indicated, we will be digressing as far as the department is concerned. And as far as fire suppression is concerned, it would be detrimental from the fire suppression standpoint. And I think Commissioner Chris Scolo, hit it on the head. You got a paramedic that's providing advanced life-saving services to a patient, it rides into the hospital. Logistically, how do you get that person back when now the only pumper that you have, and we're talking about a piece of apparatus that has water on it. The ladder truck has no water on it. So when there's a fire, the only water that is mobile is on that truck. That's it. So that's why we have 4 firefighters on that truck, in order to get that truck over to a fire scene and to begin to put fire out. So we're going to remove one person. They're going to be at the hospital, and a fire comes in. That truck goes out with now 3, and we're probably going to call the ladder truck out. And so now you've got 5 firefighters, because the paramedic unit is already out. That's the only reason why we took the paramedic off of the pumper. So now we're down to 5 people. Now, how do we get these people back from the hospital? Are we going to call Uber? Well, how are we going to get them back? Now what happens is our rescue goes back and picks them up. And that means our rescue's out of town, because now we have to go and pick up the paramedic. And yes, once that paramedic's in the rescue's back in service, and almost always they get a call while they're still in New Haven to respond to a paramedic call in North Haven. So with the call volume that we have, it just seems to be logistically nonsensical to do this. But at the same time, the residents absolutely need to have another paramedic. Our commission has been advocating to have a second paramedic, but I don't believe that the second paramedic should be on the truck. I think if we're going to do that, it should only be done for a temporary period of time until we get the PSA, are successful in getting the PSA back. And once we get the PSA back and we can contract with a company based on the language that the chief and the deputies create, I think then we might very well be able to take that paramedic off and keep a full-time firefighter on that, if in fact, as the chief said, he does this reluctantly. So I think it's put us in a very awkward position as a commission and as senior managers. Yes, we want to provide the paramedic service, but at the same time, do we want to sacrifice fire suppression? I don't know the answer to that at this point. I will refer to the chief and have him wrestle with that decision. But anyway, I think that's something that we need to seriously discuss. When possible, transfer the paramedic responsibilities to an ambulance paramedic to maintain the preferred Engine 1 personnel requirement. Well, we already have established that the current ambulance service doesn't necessarily always have a paramedic on it. So we have no control over the ambulance company as to whether or not a paramedic is in that ambulance. Now, they're going to say to us, yes, there's a paramedic in the ambulance, but I think we could certainly substantiate, and the deputy can correct me if I'm wrong, there are multiple times when paramedics are not included in the ambulance.
23 times last month, as we know of, at a minimum, because of the ride.
Okay. So, obviously, what, B is indicating, we need to allow the ambulance company to have the paramedic. 23 times last month, they weren't there. That means that our paramedic's going. And then should a firefighter paramedic accompany a patient to the hospital, summon an overtime replacement to backfill the position. So what they're saying is, we get a call, a 911 call comes in. Our rescue vehicle is out. A second call comes in. Our pumper goes out with the paramedic on it. The paramedic needs to ride into town. Now, we need to call. When do we call for that backup person? Do we call when the call comes in? Do we call when he's on scene? And we know whether it's a BLS or an ALS, an advanced life-saving situation or a basic life situation? I mean, I think that's where the deputy comes in and makes that decision as to how that works. But in the meantime, we still lose that paramedic, and how do we get him back? It's the same situation. So and then we need to put the call in for the overtime person, and they're not just waiting at home, waiting for us to call to say, hey, I need you, you're next on the list. They might be raking leaves, they might be at the swimming pool with their children in the summertime, they might be at the beach, I can't make it. Well, let's see who's next on the list. And so, do we want to run our operation that way? It doesn't make any sense to me. But, again, that's what was proposed. I still go back to saying, how the heck do we get this person back from the hospital? Do we send our truck down there? Do we put them in a cab? Do we get an Uber? I mean, how do we do it? So, I guess in my mind, I will leave number 3 up to the discretion of the chief, with the understanding that this commission has deep concerns about having a paramedic on our only water source that potentially could cause severe manpower shortage in the event there's a fire. Is that a correct statement?
Correct, 100%.
Commissioner, if I could too, I want to bring back your attention to letter B about the, if possible, transfer the paramedic responsibilities to American Medical Response. I spent 12 years at American Medical Response. I still have my 10-year citation hanging on my wall. My daughter works at American Medical Response. There's some very good people and paramedics that work there. The problem with American Medical Response paramedics or any other company paramedics is they did not swear an oath to the taxpayers and visitors of the town of North Haven on the Holy Bible in front of a justice, like every one of our career firefighters and volunteer firefighters has done. And I will not encourage my paramedics to take life-threatening critical patients and hand that care off to another paramedic that they may or may not know the capabilities of as a department. So if Engine 1 has a paramedic on it and they're dealing with a life-threatening emergency, and everybody here who's ever been to an emergency room knows that there's a difference between people who are immediately in danger of dying and people who need to be evaluated by a medical professional, right? And you've probably seen that when you sat in the hallway at an emergency room. It doesn't mean you're not sick, it just means you're not in the big room. When we have patients that are going to the cath lab that are having strokes, that are massive traumas, our paramedics, our firefighter paramedics, take pride in their professionalism and ability to care for those patients, and many, many times ride into the hospital with other paramedics because they don't feel comfortable turning that care over of what they would call their taxpayer or their charge, as they would say, and they see the care through. That's consistent in North Haven, that's consistent in Hamden, that's consistent in Milford and Wallingford and New Haven. Paramedics care for their patients, and they don't feel comfortable turning critical patients over in mid-care to ride in with another service provider, regardless of what the capabilities are. So that letter B is arguably almost impossible to do because I couldn't ethically ask a group of some of the best trained paramedics and firefighters in the country to turn care over in mid-care of critical patients. So we would lose that paramedic whether we had 100% paramedic ambulances responding or not, which we don't. We would still lose that paramedic. And that's just very important for everybody to know as that process.
Thank you for that explanation, and obviously, that explanation is from a professional who has years of experience in the paramedic, medical field, and fire services field. And as Commissioner Criscuolo clearly indicated, the persons who put this report together do not have the same skill and expertise. Number 4, additional fire medical career personnel at a price of $240,000. Hire 2 firemen paramedic for a Monday through Friday daytime only shift. The recommendation is contingent on the creation of a new day shift fireman/paramedic position with acceptance from the firefighter labor union. B, utilize Rescue 2 as a 3rd daytime paramedic response vehicle with possible positioning at Montewies. Chief, how does this impact our operation?
So this is probably one of the issues I take the hardest position with. This isn't an answer to anything, to any of our long-term problems that we're having here. There is no defined time period during the week that we're any busier than any other time. Again, I ask you to go back to the workshop and look at the 7 days a week that we showed, and all 7 days are pretty much just as busy as one another. There's also not a distinguishable 8-hour period of time that's any busier than another. There's about 17 hours throughout the day that it's just as busy. It drops down a little bit on the overnight hours, but that's where your more significant calls are occurring. So logistically, this doesn't address the concerns. The issue here is that we need additional firefighters around the clock. We need additional apparatus around the clock. There are very, very few departments that run a weighted day shift. And those that do are typically more EMS-oriented departments than they are fire departments. We are a fire department. We run about 60% medicals. A lot of departments run a lot more. If they're transporting and if they're doing other types of the medical calls that we told you that we haven't gone to, then they're upwards of 70-75% medicals. We're not doing that. We are a fire department still. So percentage-wise, we need to be prepared to respond to fire, and that's exactly what I'm trying to address. Not only that, but the labor implications of negotiating a daytime shift would be very, very hard to successfully negotiate. The contract is closed. The town just negotiated a contract, and we finalized it, I believe, during a period of time that we were even meeting as this subcommittee. And there's very little in the labor agreement that would allow us to address this without opening the contract back up. And then, here's the thing is, you look at the calls that we're missing, you look at the calls that we were short on staff, and those aren't Monday through Friday 8 to 5 calls. Those are occurring all the time. So my argument for staffing is still going to be present for my workshops, even if we were to implement this. But it would bring with it a whole series of labor implications. It would bring with it some logistical implications, because every firefighter is assigned to an officer, and now these firefighters wouldn't be assigned to any officer. It'd be whatever officer was working that day. There's no continuity in our training. There's no continuity in our day-to-day functions as a department. There's a reason we run 4 separate departments, or 4 separate shifts, I'm sorry. And looking at this, okay, at first glance, it sounds great, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, but as we've talked about, what happens at 5:05? How do I separate staff that are working, some working day shift and some working the other times? And then what do we do when we get to the point that we finally realize we need to hire more staff? We're gonna have an evening shift, a day shift, and a regular 24-hour shift? I mean, it gets crazy to manage and administer. We need minimum 2 additional staff per shift to get us started, and this does not address those needs.
Well, I appreciate those comments. We have said right along, and initially, in our workshop, we indicated that we were looking for 2 additional firefighters, full-time firefighter paramedics, potentially paramedics. The set-aside of $140,000 is approximately 50% of the cost for those 2 persons, per year. If we received approval to hire 2 persons today, we wouldn't be able to get them into the academy until, I believe it's January. And my further understanding is they wouldn't graduate until around June, I believe. So we wouldn't have those persons in service until probably the end of June. We would already have been through the budget cycle. As far as the workshop is concerned, we would need to request the additional $140,000 or $280,000 or whatever the number is to underwrite the cost of 2 firefighters that have begun in this budget cycle. And then the chief is going to certainly look to add additional firefighters in the next coming budget. Because as we clearly indicated, our ultimate goal would be to add 2 additional firefighters per shift, or have 8 firefighters that will allow us to be able to, perform the the medical duties and fire suppression duties that would be assigned by the chief. So it would be my opinion that instead of hiring part-time personnel between the hours of, or the day shift, 8 to 4, whatever it might be, that we go ahead and hire 2 full-time firefighters, and those firefighters would be scheduled for work duty at the discretion of the chief. That would be my opinion. Commissioner?
I agree.
Okay. Commissioner?
I hate to be, on the other side. It's a good idea to put them on one shift because you have the continuity, you know that they're there, they're under the same, what he called, lieutenant. But when you do that, you're kind of short-cycling the system by putting the 2 men on. And I know the town, the select person who came up with the day shift, or the Board of Finance came up with the day shift, it's only because they don't know any better, okay? It's because they haven't been around the system, they really don't know what's going on. I don't know their business, I can't count the money at the Finance Board, I'm sure they're better than I am. Well, maybe. When it comes to this, you're gonna put them on one shift, let's say platoon A. B, C, and D is not gonna have them. Now, I just wanna give you an idea of what the town is gonna face. The town should know that the minute they do that, they're gonna open themselves up for multiple lawsuits. Because if I was a taxpayer, I live in this town, I see that there's a day shift on Monday, we'll use Monday for a day, platoon A. And somebody in my family, myself, or someone in my family, gets a heart attack on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, when B, C, and D shift is shorthanded. Whether or not the second paramedic, the second unit, could have saved them, whether they could have or maybe couldn't have saved them, I'm going to say it's because there wasn't the second unit out there, as it was Monday when they saved Johnny Jones. My family member died. I think it's because of a lack of service. I think it's because the tail was wagging the dog, and we had the Board of Finance directing the fire department. And if we take them and we put them on the day shift, from 8 to 5, or 8 to 4 rather, we're going to do the same thing. If somebody dies after 5 o'clock, well, I may consider that my family member died because I wasn't allowed the same privilege and service as the people that were in town during 7:30 to 4 in the daytime. My family was slighted from 4 o'clock in the afternoon till 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And my family was slighted on Saturday and Sunday. And I know that, yes, we should be grateful that we're going to get the $240,000. Yes, we should be grateful we're going to put on 2 men. But we're not helping. 2 men is a hindrance. We're going backwards. We're going to spend $250,000 to provide basically less service. And when that paramedic is on the engine and he goes downtown and we lose him for the day and we call back another hire at time and a half, the chief's budget is going to go through the ceiling. He's going to be out of money 4 months through the year on his overtime budget, and we're going to supply less service. And I agree that obviously we're going to take the $240,000.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's $140,000.
Well, you're going to get 2 halves of it because 140 won't pay for the man.
Yeah.
Okay, 140,000.
$140,000 is what is the set aside.
Set aside
that's in
money.
the current
Right.
budget.
And then we'll get the second half.
$240,000 that they're speaking about is in the proposed budget.
Yeah, the proposed budget.
Right.
So we're eventually going to get, obviously, we can't just fire them halfway through the year.
Correct.
Or we're not going to put them on and then fire them or lay them off. So we're going to take them, I hate to use the word assume, we know what that does, but we're going to figure on getting the 240. The union is going to stop it immediately, I'm sure, because you can't have a day shift. You just can't pick and choose when you want to have a firefighter on. That's why they have a union contract. And we have the president here, we have a former union vice president, so we know that that's not going to happen. So I think this is all, smoke and mirrors It sounds nice, they brought it up, they're keeping it from the public, they don't want the public to vote on it, they wouldn't put it on the ballot, they made sure this came out after the election. It just seems like they're trying to pull the wool over the public's eye. And they're trying to use us as a scapegoat, okay, the commission and the senior management. And that shouldn't be. We have the best senior management we've ever. There's more degrees on that table than there are on the thermometer. I mean, come on. all our senior management are like super educated. They're teachers, they're instructors, they know what we need. We shouldn't even this is a waste of time, paper, and ink. It should just be left to them. The people have to come out. I mean, we can only say so much at this commission. Obviously, what are they gonna do, take away our pension? No matter what we say, they're gonna fire us. The people have to come out. This is wrong. This is an insult to the fire department. It's an insult to the chief staff. It's an insult to the commissioners. But most of all, it's an insult to the general public. We're going to protect you just 25% of your time. That's all we're going to give you is 25% protection. And we're not talking about raising your taxes thousands of dollars a year. We're talking about pennies. I live in this town. I pay taxes too. I don't want to see them go up. But for this, the minimal amount of money that you're going to pay to have protection 24/7, to have a chief administrative staff like that direct the safety of your life, your children, your family, it's a no-brainer. Get out there and fight this. Get out there and fight this.
Commissioner, let me ask you a question. As it pertains to question number 4, are you in favor of having part-time?
It's full-time, but it's daytime staffing, yeah.
Daytime staffing, or are you in favor of hiring full-time firefighters at the discretion of the chief?
Full-time firefighter at the discretion of the chief only.
Okay.
I think it's just worth noting here, Chairman, if I can, real fast,
Yes, please, Chief.
I think the intent of this is recognizing that the commission met with some of the volunteer leadership in town to identify the volunteer firefighters' needs in town, and it was heavily discussed about the shortage of daytime volunteer firefighters. But it's important to know that we're talking a lot about a second paramedic and medical calls. The volunteers don't respond to medicals in this town anyways.
That's correct.
And that's not said in any discredit to them. We've discussed it with their leadership, and their leadership and their entire membership have decided not to respond to medicals because they know what it would do to their call volume. So, looking at this as this is when the volunteers are available the most, is one set of eyes on this, but it's also the fact that we struggle with volunteers sometimes in the evenings and oftentimes overnight as well. And this is something that, we need to look at in terms of staffing around the clock.
Well, there's no question about that, Chief, but the way I'm reading question number 4, it doesn't even address.
It doesn't, but I think that's the intent of the daytime staffing.
They could
Just
have
trying.
they could have articulated
No, I understand, but I'm
more
just
clearly
trying.
if they were talking about the fact that they were going to be depending on
Right.
volunteers. Obviously, volunteers are working, in their own jobs and are not available. But having said that, based on question number 4, you're in agreement to hire 2 full-time firefighters to be assigned at the discretion of the
Chief's
chief. Commissioner.
When I was a volunteer, we had over 150 volunteers. Today, we're down to 40. And when they give us 2 more men, in my eyes, I'm not looking to hurt the union or anybody else, we're getting 2 more men than we did not have. So I'm in favor for the 2 more men.
To be utilized at the discretion of the
Chief's
chief.
discretion.
Okay. That is question number 4. Question number 5 is volunteer firefighters with a dollar value of $30,000. Integrate training and other experiences between career and volunteer firefighters. Enhance the volunteer experience, address grievances encourage mutual respect, monitor morale, etc. Complete development of the Northeast Training Facility, additional cost unknown. Assumption, volunteer staff members will not greatly decrease over time. Increase tax deferment benefit for each volunteer from $1,000 to $1,750, with step increments based on years of service. Post permanent road signage at each volunteer house with a recruiting message. Chief, how does this impact our department?
So this is really a simple one. We've got to do more to recruit and retain our volunteers in this town. I don't know if $30,000 is enough, but it's certainly a start. Their training has improved immensely over the last year since we brought on deputy chief specifically for operations, which covers training. They continue to meet their leadership with me on a monthly basis. I have every reason to believe that morale is high and that things are moving forward in the right direction. The development of the training facility is something that Mike Frieda has committed to. The intent is to take the Quinnipiac pilot funding for this next year and develop that training center. Now, the importance of that is going to make us a better fire department because we'll actually be able to train as our job requires us to do for the first time in ever, really. I mean, we had a training tower for about 2 years a long time ago that sat near the water pollution control plant, and it was only 2 years that we had it. We haven't had one again since, and it gets really hard to recruit and retain, particularly volunteers, when you're asking them to use their imagination. So by having the facility that we can actually conduct training, it will go a long ways toward retention. I think item D is perhaps the most important part there, is that's the assumption is that volunteer staff numbers will not greatly increase or decrease over time, and I do feel that way. I think that the number that we have now we're going to maintain for the foreseeable future, especially with increase in training, and training also now that's involved with them every drill. We need to do what we can to retain, but we also, I think, acknowledge that we're not going to see the numbers that we once saw in this town of volunteers, of 150, as Commissioner Capucci said. Those days are gone, and it hurts me to say that because I started as a volunteer with recruitment in numbers that high. But this isn't a problem unique to North Haven. As I said multiple times before, this is a problem all over the country, particularly in Connecticut, where people are financially strapped and working multiple jobs. Society has changed, and people don't have the time to volunteer like they once did, and the training has increased so much. So I think that's important that we keep in mind. Increase in tax deferment is something that hasn't been addressed for volunteers in decades, and $1,000, let's say 20 years ago, went a long ways. $1,000 stay doesn't go as long, and we can all agree to that. So I wholeheartedly support, and perhaps that's where they came up with the $30,000, that increase. But we also need to remember that our tax deferment benefits only those volunteers that live in a town of North Haven. And we do allow out-of-town volunteers that live very close to the town line. Because again, as we've talked about in this meeting before, I can have somebody who lives in the, in a section of Hamden, Santa Fe, let's say, street, and they're a lot closer to the Westridge Firehouse than, let's say, somebody lives on Blue Hills Avenue in North Haven. So we do allow out-of-towners with some exceptions, and they don't get anything because they're not paying taxes in North Haven. So I would ask E to be expanded and looked at as a stipend or something equivalent to a tax benefit for out-of-town firefighters, so that those who will live out of town get the same benefit those who do live in town. The signage we've worked on, we're going to continue to work on. There's been signs put up. We found that they're effective. We continue with that. There's been a recruitment line established for volunteers. Everything in 5, I agree with some enhancements.
Commissioner?
I agree with the chief.
Okay. Commissioner Crisco?
I agree. I also like to say that, when you look at D, they go back to the word assume again. I mean, we assume we're not going to have a decrease. We assume we're not going to have an increase. Well, what are you telling us? We're going to stay the way we are at 45. We have the best trained volunteer department anywhere in the state of Connecticut, and maybe beyond that. Our guys are trained. Our firefighters are trained to the max. We have a training instructor right there. That he just has everybody really tuned in. And yes, I was on that, that $1,000 20 years ago as a commissioner. I put that in. And I think that $1,750 is not enough. I think it should be more. That was 20 years ago. I think that realistically, they should probably, and I say this publicly, should probably get a $2,500 20 years later. They should get something, some enticement. Some of these guys leave work, and when they leave work during the day or night, whatever shift, or they go to work late, they don't get paid. Some of their bosses, not like 20 years ago, Chief, am I right? Joe, you know, some of their bosses are not paying them for the time they're leaving. So they're losing money on their job, from their job. They have houses to run. Everybody has a household to run. Come on. They should get a bigger increase. And like the chief said, I agree with him 100%. Firefighters that live out of our town, the neighbor our town, should get some kind of a stipend to supplement not getting the money for the tax deferment. But $1,750, I don't think that's fair 20 years later. I think $2,500 would be a much better, reasonable amount of money, because as you could see, these firefighters are hanging in there. We went from 150 volunteers to 45. I mean, do the math, guys. We're down 66%. So let's keep the firefighters that we have. We have the best trained. Let's not lose them over pennies. And the morale, the chief has brought the morale up so much right now. The DEP with the training center, everybody's working the best they've ever worked in the 24 years I've been here. So I agree with the chief 100%.
Commissioner Capucci?
I'd like to see that 1750 go to 3,000.
Okay?
Okay. So my comments, or my note will be, we are supportive of increase in the volunteer tax deferment and establish a stipend for out-of-town volunteers. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. That's number 5. Number 6, vehicles and equipment. Purchase, acquire a grant for personal protective equipment, $60,000. B, create operating line item for PPE gear, continuous replenishment, $10,000. As we all know, it's approximately $3,500 per unit to purchase PPE equipment. $10,000 basically provides 3 new outfits per year. That certainly is, in my mind, insufficient. Replace engine number 1, reassign existing engine 1 to replace an older vehicle, allocate $750,000. Repair or replace ladder truck number 2, $150,000. After the 2020-2021 budget year, consider the need to replace a pumper or a specialty apparatus every 3 years, in addition to timely replacement of rescue vehicles and ladder trucks. Chief, how does this impact our department?
So, again, taking this piece by piece, we've applied for a grant for personal protective equipment today. I discussed at the beginning of this meeting. I agree that the line increase of $10,000 is not sufficient. If you look at the number of staff we have, you look at the fact that gear lasts 10 years, you have roughly 70 sets of gear, in the last 10 years, all of them. So you're going to need to replace a lot more than 3 per year to just keep up with that. And that's on a demand of it just aging out, not even of it breaking and getting worn down and so forth, as with some of our members it does. So I think we need to look to increase that. C, I've asked for in the budget workshops, and I'll continue to do so. D is something new. D is something that we're looking at possibly buying a used ladder truck to replace the one that's currently in service. That's our old ladder truck. I just think it's important to remember that 2 years ago we lost an engine out of this station. It failed its in-service test. It then was stripped of all hose, and it became a people transporter only. We never replaced that engine. What we did was we tried to take our ladder truck that we replaced and make that a second ladder truck in town and replace the engine that's at the station for a couple of reasons. One, we were trying to save money, not have to buy another pumper, make use of an apparatus that it was aging out in terms of being used every day by headquarters, but it still has some years left to it if it's used, in a lesser extent. We're finding that's still going to cost a lot of money. It's in service right now, but we're weighing the need for, do we really put a lot more money into this, or do we look at possibly spending less money and buying something used? And that is not something that comes to me very easily, buying used fire apparatus. It's certainly not a precedent that I want to set. However, I'm willing to look at that, because to me, it's more valuable to have a second ladder truck in this town, even if it's a used ladder truck, and something that I know is going to be used less frequently than if we're at headquarters. And 150 is the lower end of that. It may end up being a little bit more. And with that, you're looking at buying a ladder truck that perhaps is down south, that has no rust on it at all. It's never seen salt winter New England roads, and it's something that can get us by for the next several years and fulfill the need of a second ladder truck. And that's something I think that's really important for people to keep in mind is, number one, having a second ladder truck positively impacts our ISO rating for the town. So the next time ISO comes in and rates the town by us having a second ladder truck, I'm really looking to get our ISO rating from we had it at a 4, I brought it to a 3. I'm looking to bring it from a 3 to a 2, which is going to save taxpayers more money, particularly our commercial taxpayers and their insurance costs. So having that second ladder truck provides us with some substantial points to accomplish that. But you look at the need, the fire we had over the weekend on Defco Park Road, we used both ladder trucks the entire time. And ladder trucks are something that they need to be there right away when the fire starts, because once hose starts getting laid in the street, well, ladder truck's not getting in there anymore. Ladder trucks are also very maintenance reliant, and so the current ladder truck we have, that's our main ladder truck, when it goes out of service, we really should have something else to back it up, because calling for a ladder from another town is sometimes going to be too late. So with that, I'm considering the purchase of a used ladder truck, which is what came up in this. And then we'll look to continue with replacing apparatus. We need to get ahead of this. Remember that in 2014, just prior to me coming in as chief, we put together a bonding package that we proposed to replace 3 engines that were all aging. And none of those engines have been replaced. One of them failed recently and was taken out of service. The other 2 are still in service today. We need to look at aggressively starting to replace the apparatus in this town, putting some money up front to do it initially, and then putting money in every year to allow us to do it continually.
Commissioners? Mary Jane?
I don't think there's anybody here that knows better than the chief what he really needs to run this department. And so I agree with what he has to say.
Okay. Commissioner Fusco?
I just want to pick your brain a second. On B and C. C being first, we talked earlier about replacement of an engine, approximately $625,000, approximately. Could we take, they want to give us $750,000. Could we take $120,000, $125,000 from there and put it up into B so we could buy more protective gear?
That's a question for the Board of Finance. I don't know.
I mean,
how they-
again, you see,
Yeah.
here's the Board of Finance, again, trying to tell you how to spend your money.
Sure, no, I understand.
They want to give us an extra $125,000 over and above what we asked for, but yet they want to short us $100,000 on personal protective equipment. You see, this is
Yeah, so-
why they need you to tell them what you need, not them to tell you how to
So
spend it.
C is a capital purchase,
Right,
and B would be an operating line that would have to
right.
be.
But they'd have to move the money around.
Yeah,
It's
so-
going from the right pocket to the left pocket.
Listen, we're in the right direction by at least talking about this.
We're in the right direction talking about. And the replacement of the ladder truck, like you said, is very, very important to have 2 ladder trucks in this town, especially now with the new economic development that's going on. The buildings that are going up that we're seeing are multi-stories,
Yeah, so
4 or 5 stories.
If you
So
look-
we're going to need that, and like you said, once you lay the line, your engine comes in, your engine lays the line, the ladder truck is useless, you can't get in.
Sure, if you look at
So we need them.
the number of mid-rises, what we call 4 or 5-story buildings that have been developed in the last 5 years, and you look at what's coming.
Yeah, economic development
I
is
don't
pushing
carry
this
ladders
town.
on engines that are tall enough to get to those upper floors. Ground ladders, I don't even carry ground ladders tall enough. You can't, engines don't do that. The only apparatus that carry ground ladders tall enough to reach those floors are the trucks. 35 and 45-foot ladders.
I mean, the senior management of this town is doing a great job bringing economic development into the town. But while they're bringing it into the town, they have to understand, you have to protect those buildings. And the taxpayers, especially commercial taxpayers today, that are investing 8, 9, 10, 15 million dollars in these buildings, want to be protected. And with the insurance rating, by bringing the second ladder truck in, bringing their insurance costs down, makes it advantageous for them to come into this town, to be protected. It all works as a team, but they have to make you the captain.
Okay. Commissioner Capuccia?
I go along with this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it appears to me that our consensus is that we are in agreement to replace apparatus and purchase a used ladder truck and increase the line item for PPE equipment.
Correct.
Okay? Number 7, mutual aid. And for those of you that are out there, that's, this is the last of the proposal. Maintain a mutual fire aid agreements with area departments. Utilize with discretion. Maintain mutual aid medical aid agreements with ambulance providers to supplement paramedic service during peak demand. Chief, how does this impact our department?
So we've talked a little bit about mutual aid already and how that's called for. I'm puzzled by the utilize with discretion.
Yeah.
It's, I don't know that I should be calling for mutual aid more because that's the answer, or if I shouldn't be. So I'm confused on the discretion part, but the fact of the matter is right now we call for mutual aid when our backs are against the wall and I've got guys' lives that are in danger. That's the God's honest truth to it. When I'm putting firefighters into a burning building and I don't have enough staff coming on my own, sometimes I do, that's when we're calling for mutual aid. I'm not calling for mutual aid for, again, the routine calls, the calls that we don't quite know what we have yet, the calls that we're delayed in responding to because we don't have enough staff of our own to respond. Those aren't the times that we call mutual aid, and nor will they become. We're tasked with responding to our calls, and we'll continue. I've expanded on the mutual aid agreements more so than in the past. We're calling in towns more frequently now than we ever have in the past, and we'll continue to do so. As far as B, with ambulance providers, again, that ties in the PSA, and that ties in some of the efforts that we're taking there to ensure that our citizens are adequately provided for. There's not much more I can say in terms of mutual aid. I mean, I think it's important to remember that this committee was tasked with trying to identify how to spend $140,000 that was available as of January 1st. So it's really a $280,000 line. It took on all these other animals that go above and beyond how to spend $140,000.
Well, there's no question that the subcommittee went way off reservation. There's no question about it.
You think?
No question about it. Commissioner...
What's the right name? Quick.
Okay. Yes, I agree with the chief.
Yeah, okay.
Of course, I'm with that. I can't let this go by.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry to say, and again, I'm not being a wise guy when I say this, but the word mutual aid, the finance board has picked up this word and they want to run with it. I don't think they actually know what mutual aid means. Just call another town. First, I want to just say, this past weekend, we had the fire, industrial park. We called in another town, mutual aid. They did come. Their stuff got damaged. Someone's going to have to replace it. It'll probably be our town that will replace it. There's no doubt in my mind. And then we'll subrogate. Mutual aid, we send out, our apparatus is on the scene, so people know what the mutual aid is. And Chief, if I'm wrong at any time, please correct me, because I don't know all the answers by far. Mutual aid, we have our apparatuses dispatched at a fire. Another call comes in. We have no one there. Okay? So we're going to call mutual aid in. Now, unless the chief has a crystal ball, or the commanding officer has a crystal ball with him at that time, he's not going to know the nature of that emergency. So when he calls in another town for mutual aid, approximately 20, 30-minute delay by the time they do get there, what is he going to tell the other town? I want you to dispatch, I'm not sure, an engine, a ladder, or a rescue truck, because I'm not sure. 4 men, 8 men, or 12 men, because I really don't know what's there when you get there. So why don't you send as many as you can and decide what you need? You think that's going to happen? And how many times you think we're going to call mutual aid because we're shorthanded, and other towns are going to say, listen, we're tired of coming with men and apparatus because now you're shorting our town. So get yourself in gear, make your department whole so you don't have to call us on a weekly basis. We don't want to do that. Mutual aid is not used like candy, that we just dispense it whenever we want. Am I right or wrong, Chief?
Yeah, no, mutual aid should be infrequent.
It should be very infrequent. And again, when we do call for mutual aid, we're not going to have mutual aid come in and do medicals because we don't know who's going to come in. So, and again, from right off the beginning, we don't know who to send. The chief doesn't know what to send because he's not there to assess the problem. I mean, I think that taxpayers of this town are very, very smart. That's why they live in this town. Out of 169 towns, we're in the top 10. 5 years AAA rated for bonding. So I think that's why they're living here. They're very smart. This is why the Board of Finance wouldn't put this on the ballot, because they know that the taxpayers would have ran and backed the chief 1,000%, because they have in the past. So we go back to the beginning where I said I'm going to go through this whole thing and say the same thing over again, and I did. And I apologize if I bored the people in this room or the people on television. But you have to know it, and the more you say it, the more you'll understand it. We have to just back the chief. It's that simple. Mutual aid, the way they're using it, is a joke. It's not made for a joke. It's made for emergencies. When the chief is there, he sees his men are in jeopardy, life and property's in jeopardy, he calls for mutual aid. Not being at the scene, he cannot dispatch mutual aid. He doesn't know what it is. So, again, this is very nice. It sounds nice that we're going to do all this, peak hours. We don't even have medical come in. We do our own, like the chief said, and we bring our own people. We take care of our own in this town. We don't have other people take care of them for us. And I agree with the chief. This whole report, whatever the chief wants to take out of it and add to it or supplement, I agree with 1,000%. This is his department, and only his department, not the selectmen, first, second, or third, Board of Finance, no one. It's his department. He runs it, and that's how it's supposed to be.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Capucci?
I'll go along with it.
Okay. It appears to me that then we are in agreement with 7A. We will maintain mutual aid agreements and call for it when lives and property are in grave danger. And for 7B, is currently addressed in our EMS plan and will be improved once we are successful in taking control of the PSA. Are we in agreement with that?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. The summary of the findings. The North Haven Fire officials are currently advocating for significant increases to the manpower of the department, with an eventual goal for additional 8 or more professionals to boost the regular staffing of each shift from 8 persons to 10 or 12 or 16 more individuals are hired. The cost of this expansion would be approximately $1 million per year for 8 firefighters, plus the cost of protective equipment and another fire apparatus at $775,000. In the opinion of the Board of Finance, participants of this workshop group, proper medical fire response for the most common situations can affordably be maintained for the next 3+ years via enactment of reasonable changes, recommendations listed in this report. After additional dispatch staffing, EMD training, and other improvements to dispatch operations, along with enhanced availability of paramedics internally and externally, North Haven medical personnel should consistently exceed expectations for emergency response time and levels of service. To reiterate, by addressing our equipment needs and peak hour personnel demands, career firefighters will possess the resources to adequately respond to typical simultaneous fire incidents and medical calls. Multiple overlapping medical calls for service can be accommodated through subcontractors' specifications, paramedic requirements, and mutual aid agreements. Any second concurring fire incident will continue to be answered with volunteer firefighters and mutual aid assistance. This report is developed to fulfill the designated purpose of the North Haven Fire and Medical Service Workshop Group. We hope that you will find these recommendations helpful in future planning and budgeting of the town's emergency services. Respectfully submitted, Richard Monaco and Michael Hallahan. Ladies and gentlemen, we've spent about a couple of hours, or maybe an hour and 3/4, going over this as I committed in the Board of Finance meeting. We would do this openly and in public. I also indicated that we were not going to adjourn into executive session to be in agreement as a commission. I wrote down all of the line items that this commission is in agreement with, and a letter from me to Michael Frieda outlining our agreement will be created tomorrow and forwarded to Michael Frieda, indicating what our position is on each of the 7 line items. The most important line item is the $140,000 set aside, and obviously this commission has agreed unanimously to hire 2 full-time firefighters to be utilized at the discretion of the chief, and so those monies, I'm hopeful, will be released to the fire department and give our commission an opportunity to interview and hire 2 new persons that will be able to go into the fire academy starting in January, and that will be utilized as far as their staffing time is concerned by the chief and assigned by the chief. I'm going to open this up now to public comments before we go into executive session. So with the raise of hands, I'll be happy to answer any questions, or have the chief answer any questions, I should say. Yes, Mary. Is there a microphone or? No. Okay, Mary, if you want to come and step forward so that way there you're going to be able to be heard. We've got some microphones here.
You want to take one to that
Actually,
table?
why don't you go ahead and put it on that table?
Take that one to that table.
Thank you, Mary.
Take my voice up, Gary.
I could just sit down, right?
Yes, please.
Mary White, Summer Lane. First, I want to thank all the members of all the commissions and boards in town for all of their hard work and their volunteering, and really, we're really grateful as residents in the town. And I even want to thank the members of that fire committee. I know that they meant well. So anyway, so when you're dealing with the Board of Finance, they are the money people, okay? They deal with numbers, they deal with statistics. And the statistics that the chief has provided, month after month after month, show a need for more personnel, more paramedics, and more apparatus. So just to give a quick, on some of those numbers, quick summary here. So on April 24th, there were 76 overlapping alarms, and 64% of the calls were EMS related. So on May 22nd, the chief reported there were 92 overlapping alarms, 60% of the calls were EMS related. On June 26th, there were 96 overlapping alarms, and 60% of the calls were EMS related. So on September 25th, which covered July, August, and September, there were 334 overlapping calls. And October 23rd, he reported that there were 103 overlapping alarms, and 63% of the calls were EMS related. So so what we're hearing is, again, it's just the call volume is going up. We have the chief again provided numbers continuously. It looks like, when you look at the year ago, what was happening then, we're talking 220 more calls in September than a year ago in September. In October, 244 more calls than a year ago in October. So clearly there's a need here. And I think, obviously, I've been talking and supporting the the fire department, and for more firemen, paramedics on every shift for a long time. I've been a strong advocate also for following House Bill 7047, which is basically replacing old apparatus, 25 years of age and older, as well as doing inspections. So what we heard is that the fire department, their needs are more personnel, more apparatus, more paramedics, and we as residents have to support and say this is a #1 priority for us. I mean, we're talking life and death here, okay? So we have to support the hiring of the 2 full-time firemen, paramedics, and utilizing that $140,000 set-aside line item. And also, we have to support the funding for the rest of those firemen, paramedics. And we have to support the hiring of more firemen, paramedics in future budgets. Whatever the chief proposes, it's for the best interest and it's to save our lives and to protect, buildings and so forth and property. And let's see, so if the chief's going to decide where those 2 firemen are going to go. So he may decide to put them on Rescue 2, he may decide to put them on Shift A, and we have to support whatever he decides to do because he's going to do what's best for the department. And we have to support if the chief decides to temporarily place paramedic equipment on Engine 1, since that engine does respond to the second overlapping call. We have to support that. And we have to support the hiring of the replacement of that firefighter when it's determined that that second overlapping call is EMS, ALS related. And the fact that, AMR will take advantage and not send a paramedic, on that second overlapping call, well, we can just take these statistics and we can add that to our cause for getting the PSA back, because they're not going to be providing the needs for the town, which is providing a paramedic on the ambulance. We also need to support, during the budget time, the line items for this personal protective equipment gear, and that has to be for continuous replacement. And whatever the chief, suggests that is the money amount for that, we as residents, we have to support that. We also have to support incentives for the volunteer firefighters. If that means increased, tax incentives, then we have to say, yes, we're going to support this. We have to support also with the apparatus. Every 3 years, replace Engine 1. Lease to purchase is a good plan that they do, and I like that. It's 4 years, and it makes it affordable. And we have to support to replace, the ladder truck, and the chief has an idea about replacing it from one down south. If the chief says that it's going to work and he can do it, we have to support that. So again, we have heard there's over 65 plus years of experience, knowledge, expertise, education. These are the people, we have to listen to them and what they all decide are the recommendations. And so, we have to tell the Board of Finance, public safety has to be the priority. We can no longer ignore the needs for more personnel, more paramedics, more apparatus in this town. And I think with a combination of increased tax revenue, we've heard about the economic, the development boom in town. Well, that is going to bring in tax revenue. And so I think with that, and then in combination with a modest tax increase, I think that we can move forward and not put the town, in a bankrupt situation. I just think that that's scare tactics that are being said. So what can we do moving forward as residents? So we can support the fire department at meetings. For example, the Board of Selectmen meets every Thursday. We can go there and we can talk about how important it is that we support the fire department. We can watch the fire department's budget workshop, which will be on January 19th at 9:15 in the morning. I asked the first selectman if those budget workshops could be filmed live, and he said it was a good idea, and there's a possibility going forward. He thinks that they could be live, so we can tune right in. Although there is no public comment, we can still watch it. We can go to the public hearing for the budget, which will be on April 2nd. It's usually at 7 o'clock at the high school. And then also we can go to the town meeting on May 6th, again, talk about the budget, but you have to get up there. I know public speaking, it's not easy, but you can get up there and you can say, hey, I support the fire department. And depending on what they include in the budget and what they don't include in the budget, get up there and say, hey, look, we need to listen to the chief and we need to do this. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate your comments. Yes. Anyone else? Yes. Kathy, right?
Jenny,
Jenny, I'm sorry.
sitting in the chair.
I'm sorry.
I'm probably going to ask more questions then. So, in terms of this issue, I think I first became most concerned when I realized that we have 4 firehouses in town, and only one of them is staffed. I had, as a resident of this town for, a short period of time compared to most people in this town, only 10 years, I did not understand that the firehouse sitting closest to my house did not have firefighters to respond to a possible fire. And I think that is a belief that most people in the town have, that when they drive by the firehouses, they think, if there's a fire at my house, it's only a short distance between that and when, fire responders can come. So I think that that is a huge piece of information that public needs to have. And I also think that that has an impact on, even with the current staffing, and I think this is my biggest question, is from the farthest place in town currently, with the staffing that we have, what is the longest time response that you have to get to the farthest distance? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yep. So I'm just trying to zoom in here enough. So if you recall from the workshop, I actually pulled up the south side of town has some of our most significant travel distances. I used 11 Broadway to a town-owned parcel of land on Brockett Farm Road, which is about as far out as you can get, and it's a 12-minute distance.
So a 12-minute distance.
There's some other areas on the extreme northwest side of town that's going to have an equal amount of distance as well.
And if those, so in terms of mutual aid, because I think this is something that's been talked about, if those parts of town are located closer to, and I don't know based on which ones you're talking about, but let's say a place in Hamden that would take you longer to get to, and a Hamden Fire Department could respond to it more quickly, is that an option, or is it North Haven needs to respond to the North Haven Fire?
It's predominantly going to be North Haven needs to respond to North Haven Fire. However, there are some exceptions to that. If we're getting multiple 911 calls that are reporting that the house is on fire and people trapped, we will call for those resources from another town before we even arrive on scene.
Okay.
It's assuming that we're getting good information from dispatch. So it's not always that way, but it can certainly be that way at times, yeah.
Okay.
There's some areas, just to give you an example, there's 2 areas on that side of town that are group homes. One's in East Haven, one's in North Haven, and because of the inherent hazards there associated with that kind of occupancy, both East Haven and North Haven respond. I mean, so that type of agreement does exist.
Okay, but it's not a commonplace thing.
Not for any town around.
Can I
so.
add, to your point with that 12-minute response time, you're talking fires, but how about medicals now? You gotta have someone who's going to identify somebody who's sick or having a heart attack, call 911. These guys still gotta get in their apparatus and gear and then drive out there. And driving through North Haven during the daytime is a feat for anybody, no matter whether you have lights or siren.
Right.
So now that time that patient is down on the ground to when we get there is well beyond that 12 minutes, no
Yeah.
matter our best efforts to get there. Now they gotta get to the house, get their gear out of the the ambulance, the rescue, and then go find the patient, bring it in the house. So by the time they're by the patient's side, you know, you're looking at 15, 17, 20 minutes. Well, if you know anything about, you know, life care, you only got a good 6 minutes
Right.
if somebody's is unresponsive.
Yeah,
Just so you know, that's the reason why I advocated for when we do increase the number of personnel, we'll have to look at putting personnel in an outlying station just to be able to make up for that.
so the 8 that you were asking for originally, was that to allow, would that allow staffing in another firehouse?
Yes.
And which would be the firehouse that it
It would
would?
most likely would have been Montauk, just because
Okay.
of the frequency. Granted, West Ridge has some similar travel distances, but Montauk, just based on the equal travel distances and the number of calls and the associated hazards with the highway and Universal Drive and the train yard and so forth, it would have been Montauk.
Okay. But adding 2 isn't necessarily going, anything under 8, or would you still be able to staff a firehouse?
Yeah, we would need at least 8 in order to adequately staff another apparatus. Whether we could, the commission and so forth would decide on how that would be staffed, but you would need at least 8 to do that.
Okay. And then in terms of the equipment and and this is truly a question, because the equipment's coming out of the one house, generally the staffed firehouse on a regular basis, right? That's what the staff fire personnel are using. So if you had 2 houses that were staffed, would that reduce the wear and tear on the vehicles that were being used?
Yeah, sure, because you're taking the call volume now that's divided amongst 3 apparatus, and you're going to divide it amongst 4.
Okay. So adding the fire personnel isn't necessarily just an expense. There are some things in which you're spending money, but you're creating a savings in another way in terms of wear and tear on the
Sure.
vehicles. Okay. And then in terms of the volunteers, when volunteers get called in, are they called to their do they go directly to a fire? Do they go to a firehouse? How does that work?
They go to their firehouse.
Whatever firehouse they're assigned to, and then they pick up their vehicle there. And how long does it take for the personnel that are staffed to know whether a volunteer is going to be able to be available?
We know when they're available when they sign on. And then we have some technology that we're starting to experiment with, which kind of allows us to make judgments at the command level as to whether or not that company has staff to respond. And there have been times where we've realized that the initial company that was dispatched was not able to respond. I could see it on my phone, and we can then call an additional company, but then you kind of add to that delay
Okay.
a little bit.
So there's a delay time. So the biggest thing in terms of, and I guess the delay time is something that I'm very stuck on, because many, many years ago, my bedroom was on fire, and I woke up in the middle of the night. And I lived in North Carolina, and all of our fire departments are paid fire departments. You know, there are volunteers that participate, but they're generally paid. And that response in someone getting there within a few minutes makes such a big difference, because your place goes up very quickly. And I had an animal that, I had cats at the time, and one of my cats was stuck behind the fire, and we eventually got her out, but it left me for the rest of my life. When I bought my home, there was no way I was living on a 2-bedroom house, because I knew that I'd never wanted that feeling of not being able to get at my kids who were in a burning house. So the response time to me, medical-wise, yes, but it's just that I actually had that experience of
You gotta
knowing.
understand that a fire doubles in size every 30 seconds.
Right.
So I think people are unaware of that, how quickly a modern-day fire burns.
Yeah.
And when you look, the other thing when we talk about the staffing of the volunteer fire stations, our volunteers are unbelievably dedicated. But keep in mind, when we built the firehouses, the one you're sitting in right now, 50, 60 years ago, West Ridge, Montauk, there were probably a third or maybe even less traffic lights. There were not as many lanes. There were nowhere near as many cars. And when, Lieutenant Irons wakes up at his house on Route 22, I know I'm calling him out, to drive to his firehouse, which is, 2.5 miles away, there's so many more lights, there's so much more traffic, And that's kind of increased the delay, and that's why we added paid staffing in 1967, wasn't because there was no faith in the volunteer system, it was just that there was a traffic delay. I mean, and now we're 50 years removed from that, we have twice, even more traffic, so.
Right.
They provide an unbelievably great service, it's just that there's always gonna be a delay getting there, and that's just logistically with the amount of road traffic. and
Right.
stuff, so.
Okay, so I think that was, I think, so basically, unless you went to the 8 men, in terms of response time, that's not necessarily gonna change,
Not with two.
not with 2.
It would start, I mean, again, I don't, I think we gotta start chipping away at this a little bit at a time. When we went from 0 paid firefighters to 28, from 67 to 74, we did it a little bit at a time. But there was a commitment, knowing what we had to work towards.
Right. In terms of missed calls, can you explain the types of missed calls and how many missed calls? I know,
So it's going to be, missed calls are going to be medical calls. Because
Okay.
a fire call, somebody will eventually sign on for, or somebody will eventually clear something and respond. And that's what's so hard about identifying only the missed calls, because we're not able to factor in the delays in response. Or did a call occur and there wasn't enough people there, and the unit that arrived on scene had to operate in an unsafe manner, or perhaps was tied up on scene longer because there just wasn't enough help there to do it and it had to get done. So right now, what you're seeing is these calls that are going unanswered are medical calls, where the individual is waiting for an ambulance to arrive for an unknown period of time. There's also times, though, that we have calls, for example, in accidents where, we have nobody to go. And we would normally be there and providing patient care and ensuring there's no further hazards, and, the car's stable, and we've had nobody to send in those cases as well. Those aren't medical calls, those are accidents, but there's still somebody going. We've just been lucky. And that's kind of my biggest concern, is that it only takes 2 calls in this town, 2 incidents of the right nature, and really it can just be an accident on the highway where I send 2 apparatus and a simple medical call, and you're out of resources from headquarters. You're now relying entirely on the volunteers, which at certain times of the day and in certain days of the week, and sometimes there's not even a trend to it, it's just because something's going on.
all right.
They're not able to respond, and now you're gonna have a fire alarm occur, you're gonna have a car fire occur, and it's gonna be parked next to a house, and what started out as a car fire is now gonna turn into a house fire, and we've got nobody going. That's why there was a paid department put in this town years ago, was to minimize that risk, so that there was at least staff going to respond.
Okay.
I think, just to add to that, I don't think there's a day in the week that one of us walks into the office in the morning to completely empty bays. By the time we get in at 7:30, 8 o'clock, all our apparatus is already out. We're the only ones there.
Okay.
And then when they come back, we don't know, And then,
And Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, in 1970, there was an actual independent report that was created that indicated that the current staffing of the department in 1970 needed to be increased. Is that
So,
correct?
Yeah, it was 1972.
Okay.
Right before we capped out at 28 firefighters, there was a study done to determine if the town had achieved the level of firefighters that were identified as being needed. So a gentleman named Warren Young Kimball went on to become a world-renowned author in the fire service. You can look him up. He's got several published books. Town contracted and hired him to do a study, and the study in 1972 was that 12 firefighters need to be on duty at a minimum of 10 at all times. So they're going to shift to 12, running down to 10, with 2 engines and a ladder. That predates us even responding to EMS. That predates the volunteers at that time in 1972 had 150. That predates the call volume and the hazards and that wasn't adhered to at that time.
Now, there's since been an additional review done by UNH, correct?
Correct.
And what year was that done?
2014.
And what was the outcome of that?
So that the focus of that was more so on the volunteer firefighters in town, and there was less focus on overall staffing and more focus on internal structuring that should be done to better ensure recruitment and retention of volunteers. It was less about staffing, but it did make some recommendations on officers and things of that sort. Yeah.
Okay.
I just have two more things. In terms of number 3 on this report, where they were talking about putting the paramedics on engine 1, and you said you would consider doing it. I guess I'm unclear on what the benefit of doing that, putting them on the engine that has the ability to, it has water, I guess is the issue, right?
It's only apparatus
So
with water,
what would be the benefit to putting the paramedics on that particular engine? Because what I heard was that it actually would be detrimental. So I don't know why. I would encourage you to say no to that, because I don't see the purpose of it. If it's to add a paramedic, why not add a paramedic to a different vehicle instead of this suggestion doesn't, from what I heard, doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I would just, as a resident of the town, encourage you, if you don't think it makes sense, then I don't think we should do it just because 2 people of the Board of Finance thought it was a good idea. So I just want to say that I personally support what you think makes sense, and I didn't hear anything that made it sound like this particular suggestion made any sense whatsoever. So, so that was one thing. And then on number 6, when they were talking about the vehicles, I wasn't really, can you explain what the purpose of the reassigning and the, reassigning engine 1 to replace an older vehicle, reassigning it, are they saying?
Yeah, that's actually pretty easy to explain. So, engine 1 is the busiest apparatus in terms of engines in the town. So when you look to replace an engine, you'd want to replace the most active piece, the piece that's actually getting worn down the fastest, so that then you take the existing engine 1 and you can replace it with something else outlying, and it will be used less. So it's actually a strategic
Shifting a
decision
vehicle.
to just shift vehicles around. And that's why we agree with it.
Okay.
And then they spoke about purchasing a new vehicle to replace that engine 1.
So
the
one of
new-
them would get some
them-
other apparatus
Something
would get
else. Right, not
retired.
engine 1, but something else. Like
Right.
the 2 that I have that are still 25 years old right now.
Okay,
The existing engine would replace one of those, and the new engine would fill in at headquarters. You're just
Okay.
shuffling on apparatus.
It
We just
extends
changed
the
the
life
number.
expectancy
Yeah.
of our vehicles, is what it does.
okay.
And I think the expectation is that the central station would have the newest vehicle because that's the station that responds more frequently to calls. So the piece of equipment that would be currently potentially at the central station would move into, let's say, this station, retire a 30-year-old vehicle, and that other engine would replace it.
Okay. And then the last thing I just want to say is I, as a taxpayer, we spend a lot of money on things that I don't necessarily support. But I don't think that there are very many taxpayers who would disagree with having enough emergency personnel available to make sure that their family is safe. And I think if they understood the level of which it seems apparent that we don't have enough staffing, that it should be that this decision should go directly to the taxpayer, because the game that happens with the budgeting process is, this is the budget that's been presented, the Board of Finance whittles it down to whatever they think is important, and then as a taxpayer, you're told, vote for it, or we're gonna cut it more. And then instead of getting the more firefighters that you think we should provide, we're gonna give you less. And you're sort of stuck in a place of, if I don't vote for the budget, it's not that I'm not voting for the budget because I don't think we need fire personnel. I actually think we need more, or I think we're spending money on stupid things when we should be spending money on fire personnel. And so I personally think that if the residents of North Haven want to do something, the push should be for this question, for some question to be on the ballot in which the residents get to decide, do I want to play the lottery, or do I want to pay to make sure my family is safe? And that to me seems the most straightforward, most transparent way to handle this. And that's something I would support and really push for, because the typical budget game is either support it or we're going to take more away from you, and that doesn't seem fair. So, especially when we're talking about, emergency services.
Sure.
I think this commission has advocated for that and is very much in favor of that initiative. The Board of Finance has been reluctant, as you know, for the 10 years that you've been a resident here, to include items on the referendum for vote. I have spoken about this publicly. This commission has addressed this issue multiple times throughout the years, and I've had personal conversations with Michael Frieda, advocating to do that. I think that the general consensus is that there are not a lot of residents that attend meetings such as this, come to Board of Finance meetings, Board of Selectmen meetings, as Mary indicated, and they don't voice their opinion. And as a result, the holders of the purse strings feel that everybody is happy. So I think there needs to be an initiative that is instigated by you or some other residents in the town that bring a number of residents to a town meeting with the intention to support public safety, in particular the fire department, and the needs of the fire department to protect the residents, business owners, and visitors of our town.
Right.
And the only way in our form of government, which, as we all know, is a town meeting form of government, is to bring persons to the meeting. And when enough persons get up and they speak with a common voice on a common subject, the senior management of the town will listen, because that's our form of government. So I would highly recommend that an initiative be established. We did the same thing for the SROs. When you look at what took place for the school system, for the best interest of our children, and I wholeheartedly agreed with it, we found the money, we hired the personnel, we put them in place, and they're there to protect our children. Well, the likelihood, God forbid, of a disaster in one of our schools is remote in comparison to the day-to-day disasters that these people and the persons that are in the audience here provide services for our residents and businesses for. So it depends on the residents of this town as to whether or not they want to mobilize and support the initiative of the fire department. The chief made one of the best presentations ever as far as a workshop is concerned last year. He gave statistics and overviews of what the department is all about and where the manpower is utilized and where the weaknesses and shortcomings are. All of that was done with the instruction of our first selectman, who indicated to us as a commission and senior managers to provide the current and future needs of this department. And that's where the discussion came about as far as 8 or 16 firefighters and obtaining a grant. But what happened was everyone latched on to 16. And then no one said that that's what we were requesting. We were talking about the long-term goals of the department in order for us to man additional apparatus, make sure that we had paramedic service, that we would be able to respond to calls and not miss as many, if you will, calls that are coming in currently. And be able to keep lights on and personnel in another firehouse to reach the most distant parts of our town. Unfortunately, that was all misinterpreted, and I think many people thought it was a grab by the fire department looking for 16 people. I think if we were able to get 16 people, we would be able to do a hell of a job, and we would make sure that we would be able to perform the way, shape, and form that this senior management team would allocate those persons to perform the duties and our fiduciary responsibilities. But we understand that everybody doesn't have a lot of money, and we understand that residents don't want to pay a lot of money in taxes. But in the meantime, I use the TJ Maxx slogan all the time, the max for the minimum. You want the most amount of services for the least amount of money. You can't do it in public safety. Fire apparatus cost a lot of money. Personnel cost a lot of money. But how much is a life worth?
Right.
Mary, time and time again at meetings, talked about the lives that are being saved and what's a life value. You know,
And I think if you actually go into our budget and other departments, you know, they are adding personnel. I mean, the Board of Ed, I know for a fact, because I was on the board for years, the number of personnel that have been added to the Board of Ed during the time that I was on the Board of Ed is significant. So, you know, I think really we need to be looking at, you know, where do we want to spend our money? And not that you know, I think the public schools is very important, but I think that that we really need to be evaluating where the money is going. And to me, not spending money on emergency personnel is very short-sighted overall, because it's just, you know, it is the lottery system, and you just hope you're not the person who can lose out on it. The other thing, and then this is my last comment, is I also agree that I found this report to be a little bit condescending, I don't know if that's the right word, to the fire chief and to this commission, because the Board of Finance doesn't know how you would run a fire department. I have no idea how you would run a fire department. That's why I asked a lot of questions, is because I was completely, I didn't realize, you know, the current situation. And I think that's probably 99% of the residents in this town. They're in the position I was in, which is they don't realize what we don't have and how they are really left open without being able to fulfill the request for the firefighters, so that you could staff another house or you know, get the equipment that you need. So I just wanted to reiterate, I agreed with everyone who thought that was a little bit inappropriate.
Thank you
I'm not
very
sure if
much.
that
I
was the right
appreciate
word,
those
but
comments.
thanks.
Anyone else for public comments? Tom?
Tom White, Summer Lane. My expertise is in law enforcement, not in the fire service. So I would never have any, in a million years, I'd never ask you or question any of your methods for fire service. Your command staff, you have plenty of expertise in this field. And quite frankly, I served in the management staff in New Haven PD for 30 years, well, 20 years out of my 30, and police chiefs from other communities never offered any comments or suggestions about how our chief should run his department. So if I was in your position, I'd be insulted that anybody from any community would offer any suggestions on how you should run the FD here. Their communities operate however they do, but they have no bearing on how things operate here. And I've been listening, watching for a long time, and I think it's obvious that you and your command staff have established the proper fire and EMS model to adequately service the needs of our town currently and for the foreseeable future. And I believe the Board of Finance should simply accept the responsibility and embrace innovative methods on how to effectively fund that and not worry about anything else. 2 additional firefighters are a step in the right direction, but by no means are going to solve the existing issues. And acceptance and implementation of those firefighters should be at your discretion. So, you know, the estimated cost that they brought forth shouldn't be alarming to any of us, because if the necessary growth had been funded incrementally over the years, we'd never have this kind of impact. We'd never be looking at that. That substantial cost could have been avoided. So it's quite simple to me. You know, the experts, we should defer to the experts, and you put a plan together. You've uttered and answered questions repeatedly, time and time again. You've never wavered from the plan. The plan's clear. So over time, it's going to save the town tons of money because it's going to work effectively and efficiently. So they should pay attention to that and move forward with that. So,
Yeah,
thanks.
I appreciate it, Mr. White. And it's funny that you mentioned the other fire chiefs. The towns that are being called are selectively being called because they're a smaller department, and they're typically not going to have a career fire chief that understands the professional courtesy that you kind of alluded to. One of the towns that was contacted, the chief got on the phone with me right away and let me know. The others, not so much, but they're selectively picked towns that fit the agenda. I've mentioned towns that are the same. If we're going to look at just population, I've mentioned towns that have the same population as North Haven on paper because, again, there's multiple things you have to look at, but that's the one thing that's been picked out. And if you look at New London and Westport and Brantford and Guilford, and I know I named at least a fifth one. I think I was told, well, those towns all have shoreline. Well, if you call those towns, they're not going to the shoreline for very many calls. What they have is highways and rails, just like North Haven. It's not the shoreline. And I think the first paragraph in their summary of findings identifies the cost. That's not the primary concern, is the cost.
Right.
The primary concern needs
service.
to be the
Right.
service
Right.
and the continuity of service at that. So I appreciate your thoughts.
No problem.
And Tom, the chief makes mention of some of our neighboring towns, and there's some towns that are equal in size to our demographics and population that have most recently hired significant numbers of firefighters. Those towns don't have AAA bond ratings. Those towns probably don't even have the same call volume that we have. But in the meantime, and Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, it was a Guilford or Brantford?
Brantford and Guilford both hired 8 firefighters in the last 2 years.
And their Board of Finance and their residents of their towns unanimously approved the hiring of those personnel. Why are their towns different than our town? Why are their needs
I'll give you an example.
different than our needs?
Guilford now is going to be up 40 professional firefighters, and they had none 10 years ago.
Okay, there you go.
And just to add to that, we took and we knocked down and built a brand-new firehouse in Mount Louise. We remodeled this one. We remodeled the Ridge. And we gutted and remodeled headquarters. For a little less than 10 million. Bradford signed a blank check for 12 million for one building. And they're gonna build another one, by the way. And I respect it coming from you, Tom, because you have 30 years of experience. I would respect a report from you before I take theirs.
But thank you for your comments, I appreciate it. You have any
Yeah,
further?
I'm good.
Anyone else with public comments? Yes.
Thank you.
Hi there. I will be brief. I'm Kurt Andrews. I have, what's that?
I thought you were Chris Kringle.
I am. Ho, ho, ho. I've been a volunteer in this town for better than 40 years, since I was 16. I've served under every chief in this town. I am very honored to be part of the command staff as the lieutenant in charge of the fire police. I look at this report as an opportunity. To me, it's encouraging that there are members of the Board of Finance that are investing in the fire commission and the fire department, and I'm encouraged by what Mr. Frieda said at the Board of Finance meeting. We have not had a command staff like these guys. From their education and having been on numerous scenes with them, we're a much safer department. As you reiterated earlier, morale is much better. Our training is phenomenal. So this is a tremendous opportunity, and I appreciate what you guys are all doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Any other public comments? Yes.
Yeah, Stephen Irons, Clintonville Road. I'm a volunteer at West Ridge, and what he said times two. But I just want to address the volunteer issue. I defer to the chief on how to staff the paid station, and I think you have to have a paid station, in these modern times. But volunteers multiply the effectiveness of the entire department because they're very cheap. The pay isn't great, but we're very dedicated and we really enjoy what we do. And I can speak for the Ridge. We have people in Hamden who want to join our department because the Hamden Volunteer Fire Department, it's basically a social club. The Ridge is not a social club, and for that I'm grateful. But in order to keep it that way, I just want to focus on one thing, and that is the apparatus. Ours is one of the stations that two of the oldest apparatus, and I was disappointed when we didn't get it at the last budget meeting. So as a resident and a firefighter, I just want to reiterate my feeling that that's one of the most important things we need is apparatus, and that will make it easier to bring in new firefighters, new volunteers to staff to help out the town, and to recruitment, which this brings up recruitment. Just hearing one of the other residents, I wasn't surprised. I was saddened, but not surprised to hear that yet another resident doesn't really realize how our fire department works in terms of volunteers and headquarters. And if more people knew about how our system worked, and that one could be a volunteer, and that the town provide more recognition for the volunteers, and I don't want an award, but if the town could somehow raise the profile of the volunteer department, I mean, we are one department, but the town sees us all as sort of equal, and we are in terms of, I believe, in terms of training and effectiveness. But if they could see what we have to go through to be volunteers, and for them to understand better what we have to go through, I think that will help with recruitment and also make the hires that the chief wants to do even more effective. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comments? Here, yes.
We'll get away with that one.
There you go.
This should be fun. Brian Marino, Grove Road. I'm in my 18th year at the department. I actually ran on my first call out of here, right where I was sitting on engine 5 as a junior member. I'm glad we're all on the same page with this. Got to reverberate pretty much almost everything you guys said. As the representative of labor here, as the union president, I'm also a shift commander in the department. So I actually have a lot of answers on how some of that stuff would work as the officer who is going to have to deal with trying to call somebody in on an emergency scene to try to get somebody there. But I'm not even going to call the question the legality of this whole thing. Under what authority, nothing disparaging towards the Board of Selectmen. I believe his heart was in the right place, but the lawfulness of the subcommittee, was there a set of bylaws and rules that were followed? How were votes taken? Was Robert's rules, Atwood's followed, all that fun stuff? That'd be more a question for the town attorneys and all that, but it would be nice to have answers on there. Were meeting dates posted, all that fun stuff? None of that was brought up throughout this whole process. I'm going to ignore the first one just because our chiefs have a great deal with what that's happening. It's more of a legal thing right now. They're on the right page. It kind of shows how disconnected some of these people may have been on this committee. As far as the dispatch center, although it affects us majorly, police department's game. There are people to supervise. That was kind of out of order. The creation of the 24/7 paramedic unit on Engine 1 is illegal. I'm going to tell you right up. It's a violation of MERA. There are 7 things an employer can't do, and unilateral change is one of them. So it's something that needs to be negotiated with the union without a doubt, because it is unilateral change across the fire department. Beyond all that, even if we agree to something like that, it's pure insanity to try to get that done. Trying to call the minimum career staff that we have in from part-time jobs, living out of town. We have some members that live as far away as Trumbull, Lyme, Oxford. It's not something that's going to work. On top of the fact of that whole getting caught at the hospital with the rescue going to pick them up. And I mean, AMR has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt since January of 2010, the first time they didn't send a paramedic here, that the North Haven Fire Department is the preeminent paramedic responder for this town. We really don't need to get into any more of that. It's funny because, you know, I agree with Jenny Caldwell about this report being condescending and downright distasteful. So much of this stuff in here was brought up by the chief at his budget workshop meeting. I cut up without concern to what was brought up there. Hiring 2 people with acceptance from the firefighter labor union, like it's going to be something automatic. Also illegal, more unilateral change, violation of the collective bargaining agreement, extremely condescending, disrespectful not only to our command staff, you guys as a commission, the fire union, and everybody in this town who has a stake in all of this, as we are here responders here. It doesn't work rolling the dice on trying to estimate when an emergency is going to come in. The easiest thing to do in all this, besides all the implications from all of that stuff, is just act upon the fire department's recommendations. The chief made recommendations at his budget workshop. It was very well articulated. It involved a lot of fact, involved a lot of what's happened here. We've had some very bad emergencies happen here. We've had some very unfortunate events, and they are not uncommon here. These are common things that happen in this town. This is not the 5,000 person farm town that it was 40 years ago. This is a town of, we're going to see the next U.S. Census coming up in 2020. It's going to be a town of over 30,000 people. Economic growth has been outstanding, and I commend the Selectman's office for that. But the big one of the trying to compare us to other towns is very old and antiquated in this business. We no longer compare ourselves to other towns because some politicians will compare us to towns that's very convenient for them to compare us to. They don't have a lot of comparisons. We compare ourselves to standards now, NFPA and OSHA specifically. In order to get us even remotely close to where those standards are, we need to act upon the recommendations of the fire chief, plain and simple. As far as the volunteers goes, I think those numbers are, I mean, we're not even talking anywhere close at even the highest mark for $3,000 for these guys on stipends. That's not covering property taxes, car taxes, any of that stuff. I know that it is a volunteer position, but I mean, even some of that, the fact that it's only $1,000 still, is a bit absurd. And a $750 increase in this time and age is absolutely downright disrespectful. The vehicles and equipment was very well covered during the chief's budget. We've talked about for years on a capital improvement plan for everything. Right? It's not just the fire department. We've seen our critical infrastructure in this town slowly degrade. I mean, a lot of that is on previous generations of politicians that we've had here that watch our schools crumble into nothing. Same thing happened to the fire department, which is why we've seen a brand new high school, a brand new junior high school, firehouses, and a police station all trying to get done within the same decade. And that's unfair to the taxpayer, and it's unfair to all of us that are trying to run departments effectively and efficiently. I think it's funny that the word mutual aid kept getting brought up because what they're actually talking about is automatic aid. It's not mutual aid. Automatic aid would be completely abusing one of the towns around us and using them as a preeminent responder for our town, completely ignoring the fact that we do have the ability to staff our town properly. I mean, we're looking at, by their numbers here, a $1 million increase is going to be a minimal effect on the business owners and the taxpayers here. I know I live right here in the center of town. With the way the grand list is growing and the impacts that's going to hit the grand list in a couple of years when we see big things like Amazon hit, and I know everybody's wanting to reach into the honeypot to get their part of it here, but it's going to be a very, very minimal impact on it. If that number is true of $1 million for 8 guys, an extremely minimal impact that most people won't notice. Outside of me as a shift commander here and as union president, I am also a resident here with young kids in the school system. And I could speak for a lot of other parents of school-age children, people like me that have 2 jobs. I have a wife that works full-time. Most people aren't paying attention to all this stuff because they're way too busy to. Kids are a lot busier now than they were 30 years ago. They have their own clubs, they have sports, all that stuff. People don't have the time to be sitting here at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night debating this because they're making lunches, they're getting kids ready for the next day. All of us here in this town that have the ability to have this voice here have the responsibility of providing the town with the protection that it deserves without truly the interjection. We all know what the right answer is here. And I'm glad that everybody in this room has been on the same page, but it is a very small minority of the people in town here that are represented in this room. People are too busy to have to deal with this. And maybe our town form of government is a bit antiquated in a town this size in 2018, that we don't have aldermen or councilmen to represent individual neighborhoods and that kind of stuff. Maybe we could explore the Home Rule Act from the selectmen side of things and maybe choose a different form of government that better suits us in this town coming up upon the year 2020. I'd just like to kind of end with saying that the most true part of this entire report is the first couple sentences of the summary of the findings about what the North Haven Fire officials are currently advocating for about the staffing to increases. Yes, that's absolutely correct. They talk about the cost in there. And at the end of that paragraph, they use the phrase "can affordably be maintained" via enactment of reasonable recommendations listed in this report. I'm sure the town attorneys didn't review this, but they are now assuming all the liability for really anything that happens past this. That's a dangerous, dangerous thing to put forward on a recommendation, that with the recommendations in here, we'll fix all the problems and could be affordably maintained for the next 3 years. That's a very, very dangerous thing to say. I'm very happy that all you guys here are on the same page. We can't afford any more things to put on the workforce, both on the career side and the volunteer side. We're already busting at the seams. There's no reason, and the problem with us down here on the floor level, we weren't considered at all in this. It seemed like they called everybody else in town and asked their opinions about that, except for the voice of labor that's actually performing the work. Us, we're the ones actually performing this work, and we weren't considered at all in this study whatsoever, which is definitely downright disrespectful, especially me, not only as a union president, but as a shift commander here. I'm an educator for the state of Connecticut at the Fire Academy. I was asked nothing about this by the members that were involved. I do believe that deep down that their hearts are in the game here, but there always seems to be this stigma over the fire department that you're not going to increase staffing. You know, we'll slowly increase everything else throughout the town, but never the staffing in the fire department. That's pretty much all I have here. You know, I'm very happy to see that we are all on the same page. The chief and the commissioners run this fire department. That's all there is to it. I own a lawnmower, so I don't think I should put a committee together of guys here that also own lawnmowers and start making decisions on the public works side of things and sanitation. So we'll leave with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Great job, Brian. I appreciate your comments and certainly appreciate the representation of the union. You've got a significant piece of the pie and of the battle, and it's nice to hear your voice and the voices of your colleagues. So I want to end this segment of our meeting. We still need to adjourn into executive session here, but as I indicated earlier, I think it will be incumbent upon the residents of this town to form some kind of organization to come together with a common voice and a common focus in support of the chief's recommendations that he put forth during the last budget workshop. The new budget workshop that's going to take place, as Mary indicated, in January, will be similar to what he presented in this past budget workshop. But I have to tell you the truth, if I were he, I'm not sure that I would go into such an elaborate explanation and preparation for not a lot of results. all of that information has fallen on deaf ears. And I think it's time that our residents of this town raise their voices up so that their ears can hear what the wish of the public is. And if the wish of the public is to support the initiative that's been laid out by the fire chief, then I think that needs to be the message. And if it boils down to requesting a referendum where there's going to be a vote, then so be it. And we will accept whatever the decision is, up or down, by the residents of this town as to whether or not they are willing to incur the minimal increase in tax costs to provide additional public safety. On that, I'll welcome you to stay, but we're going to adjourn into executive session. But do I hear a motion?
Motion made.
Do I hear a second? All in favor?
Aye.
We're in executive session.
2.
I'd like to reconvene the Tuesday, November 27, 2018 North Haven Fire Commission meeting. We have 3 motions to be made. Commissioner Capucci.
For Lieutenant, Company 2, Cody Dubiak and Matt Fournier and Tom DiCello. For Captain, we have Angel, Sanjurio, and Ray Pernier.
First Lieutenant.
For First Lieutenant,
And that will be effective
January 1st, 2015, 19.
January 1st, 2019.
2019.
All right.
I'll second.
Do I hear a second to the
I'll
motion?
second that motion.
Any question on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Commissioner Mulligan.
I make a motion for, first, for Lieutenant Justin Orlando, Tom Crilly, and Stephen Irons, and First Lieutenant Tony McKinney, and Captain Reese Barney, effective January 1st, 2019.
Do I hear a second to the motion?
Second.
Any question on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Commissioner Criscola.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gives me honor and pleasure for Company 4 Northeast, the First Lieutenant Todd Ritchie, Lieutenant Anthony Minicucci, Lieutenant Jeff Miller, First Lieutenant Bobby Kovac, and Captain Carl Vanes.
Do I hear a second to the motion?
Oh,
Second.
I apologize.
No, go right ahead. I'm sorry, Commissioner.
Effective January 1st, 2019.
Do I hear a second to the motion?
Second.
Any question on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Any further business coming before this commission? Any other public comments? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
This meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.